Chapter 817, Unbreakable Conflict. After a short distraction, Ivan took a sip from the cup on the table. The hot liquid flowed down his throat and into his stomach. The rising heat gradually dispelled the cold of the winter, and the slightly bitter taste lingered on his tongue, invigorating him. Dumbledore, who was also sipping from his cup, suddenly asked,
"What do you think of the wizarding world now, Harles?"
Ivan was taken aback by Dumbledore's words. He did not quite understand why the old professor had suddenly changed the subject, but after thinking about it carefully, he replied,
"Professor, I believe that the current political system of the British wizarding world is too rotten and backward, that some laws which were enacted centuries ago are no longer fit for the times, and that changes are urgently needed."
Ivan went on.
"The Muggles are rich and poor, as are the wizards.
Dumbledore said noncommittally.
But wizards are different from Muggles. They have magic that can be used in more important places, and they can live a better life on their own, rather than being a handyman or a thief in a place like Knockoff Alley."
Ivan argued earnestly. He disagreed with Dumbledore, who believed that any wizard who could do magic would be worth far more than an ordinary Muggle. They were able to magically enlarge, shrink, float, and transform an object at their own whim.
"So you wish to make the existence of wizards public?" "Yes."
Ivan nodded without hesitation. He had read the Ministry's report and knew that Dumbledore was one of the greatest supporters of the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy, but he would not lie about it, as he was certain that he was doing the right thing.
"Have you thought about how to resolve the conflict between Muggles and wizards?"
Dumbledore asked, not at all offended by Ivan's response.
"Or, to put it another way, what sort of identity you would expect a wizard to live in the Muggle world?"
Ivan wasn't so sure. He hadn't thought about it before, so he could only bite the bullet and answer.
"Probably wizards become highly paid professions that are entirely dependent on talent and very special. I'm afraid it will be very difficult."
Dumbledore shook his head with a smile, took another sip from his cup and sighed.
"They will not be content with this."
Ivan fell silent. He knew exactly what Dumbledore was talking about. Most wizards treated Muggles with arrogance and even disdain, and they usually considered themselves superior, as evidenced by the way they addressed them. Moreover, the difference in strength between the two sides would also magnify this mentality. After all, a properly educated wizard could toy with a Muggle if he or she wanted to. A bottle of love potion could make a beautiful woman or a handsome man fall madly in love with him, and magically create an accident that could easily kill the person he or she loathed. Not to mention the fact that a few wizards could cast such bug-like spells as memory charms and legilimency, which could erase and tamper with Muggle memories at will. It can be said that Muggle laws and regulations have no binding power on a wizard, and that few people can resist the temptation to commit a crime if the other party is clever enough to do so without being seen.
"What if we registered all the wizards and regulated their spell casting?"
Ivan asked indignantly.
"No wizard will give up his or her right to cast spells freely, and the Ministry of Magic does not have the power to govern adult wizards."
Dumbledore put down his teacup and looked at Ivan sternly. The fact that every once in a while there are wizards who can't stand the temptation to go on a rampage in the Muggle world, and that the Ministry of Magic has to go to great lengths every year to deal with these vicious events.
"If you can't guarantee that all wizards will be in order, then making the wizarding world public will only inflame the conflict between wizards and Muggles, which will eventually lead to war."
Chapter 818, International Wizarding Secrecy Law 1. Dumbledore's words were like a sharp sword, shattering Ivan's shallow understanding of the wizarding world and causing him to revisit the conflicts between wizards and Muggles. However, the more he thought about it, the more confused Ivan became, as he could not think of a solution to the problem. After all, wizards were not united. They were scattered all over the world, each with their own ideas, unable to make even the most basic decisions. Even if he could achieve something in the future, it would not help. The trust that he had worked so hard to build might be destroyed by a riot somewhere. And that's just the trouble with wizards. The Muggle mind is the trickier one. When an ordinary person suddenly learned of the existence of wizards in the world, they would use all kinds of magical tricks to easily toy with them. What would they think? Envy, jealousy, fear, hostility. What will those in power think? Will they see the power of wizards as a threat, fear them, and even think of suppressing wizards as a means of pleasing the voters? Ivan's brow furrowed at the thought, and he had an answer. Differences between people of all races, religions, sexes, ethnicities, and states can lead to discrimination, ill will, and even war, not to mention the essential difference between wizards and muggles.
That's why the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy is needed.
Ivan muttered. He had previously believed that the existence of the Statute of Secrecy largely resulted in a lack of communication between the wizarding community and the outside world. Now, however, it seemed that the law did more good than harm. Because it separated muggles from the wizarding world and eliminated the possibility of large-scale conflict, it is little wonder that the law was universally approved by the wizarding community and continues to be today.
You seem to understand that the International Statute of Wizarding Secrecy protects both muggles and wizards.
Dumbledore said solemnly. Ivan nodded. He had not thought things through enough, oversimplifying and neglecting important things. This, of course, did not mean that Ivan approved of the continued enforcement of the Statute of Secrecy, as wizards could not hide their presence forever.
The Statute of Secrecy has kept this balance for over 300 years, and I don't think we're going to get another 300.
Ivan said sternly. Unless the wizarding community around the world imposed stricter regulations on wizards and witches at the same time, they would be in trouble for at most 50 years. Half a century may seem like a long time, but it's obviously not enough time to foster communication between wizards and muggles.
You are right, Hulse. Some changes are needed in the wizarding community.
Ivan's anxious heart relaxed, but before he could relax, Dumbledore continued.
But you can't come up with a perfect solution, can you? Increasing wizarding contact with muggles means increasing the risk of exposure to the wizarding community. Since the International Statute of Secrecy was enacted in the late 17th century, concealment has become common knowledge in the global wizarding community, and there have been many attempts to break this status quo, all of which have failed.
Chapter 819, The Plan to Dominate the World. Ivan had a vague idea that Dumbledore was hinting at something, but he did not elaborate further and continued speaking.
A few decades ago, there was someone who wanted to change the status quo in the wizarding world as much as you did.
Ivan raised his eyebrows. He had guessed almost instantly who she was talking about.
Well, you seem to know something about him, too.
Dumbledore asked, slightly surprised.
I read about Grindelwald in the Great Wizarding World. It said he wanted wizards to live openly in the world and even rule over muggles.
Ivan probed, half joking. Dumbledore nodded at first, then shook his head.
That's one way to put it, but it's not accurate enough.
A few decades ago, there was someone who wanted to change the status quo in the wizarding world as much as you did.
Grindelwald thought he could beat the muggles, win the war.
Ivan asked, puzzled. He expected that wizarding magic, while magical, would never be able to triumph over the muggle world.
Grindelwald spent decades traveling, promoting his ideas, gaining the support of many wizards, and having followers almost all over the world.
Dumbledore said with feeling, visibly moved, before regaining his composure and continuing.
Not only that, he chose the best time to carry out his plan.
Ivan muttered to himself, suddenly remembering that Grindelwald was most active around the time of World War I and World War II. Muggles were hostile and war-torn, and it was, in a way, the best time for wizards to take the stage.
So Grindelwald is trying to start a muggle war, weaken them, or perhaps join one of them on behalf of the wizarding community and try to manipulate and win over the others higher-ups.
Ivan speculated, equally impressed by Grindelwald's generosity. More importantly, it seemed to work. Wizards possessed magical abilities and were a must for both sides of the war. However, Germany, an up-and-coming power attempting to topple the old world, was clearly more suited to Grindelwald's requirements than the Allies, who were already in control of the world order. All that was needed was propaganda, and the wizards would be able to turn the tide of the war by magic, gaining the approval and support of the soldiers and civilians alike. Finally, of course, there was the stealthy erosion of the Muggle upper classes, the waiting for victory in the war, the granting of titles, the preaching of blood, and the subjugation of the wizarding community into a privileged class, thus fulfilling the dream of wizarding supremacy over Muggles.
Remarkable idea.
Ivan exclaimed, having sorted out Grindelwald's plans for world domination. Grindelwald was impressed with the way in which Grindelwald was able to think for the wizarding community, find a plausible route, and work for it.
Remarkable indeed, but it was all in the air, and he could not even complete the first step of his plan.
Dumbledore whispered.
Why do you say that?
Ivan looked at Dumbledore in surprise.
Grimward does not represent all wizards, and there are as many against him as against him.
Dumbledore's face was grim. For example, the International Confederation of Wizards has been trying to arrest Grindelwald and put an end to his nefarious schemes, and in fact, they have had some success in sending Grindelwald to prison, only to have him escape again due to mismanagement. Ivan instantly understood that Grindelwald could not resolve the internal conflicts within the wizarding community, and that all of his schemes could not be carried out. If they joined the Axis, the Allies would have a large number of wizards to help them, and they would end up in a balanced situation.
And did Grindelwald think of a way to reverse the situation?
Ivan asked Dumbledore. Grindelwald's methods must have been extraordinary to have come up with such a grand plan, and he would not have been so easily defeated.
Destroy Paris.
Dumbledore said slowly.
Huh?
Yvonne was stunned. Why did it suddenly have to do with the destruction of Paris?
What do you think will happen when an important Muggle city is destroyed?
Dumbledore asked, instead of answering immediately.
Then everyone would know about the existence of wizards, and the Muggles would panic.
Ivan tried to deduce. Dumbledore nodded.
Grindelwald's deliberate attempt to create this sort of antagonism, to force all neutral wizards to his side.
Ivan said.
It is clear that he failed, and the Aurors who arrived in time joined forces to stop his magic and prevent the tragedy.
Dumbledore coldly stated. Ivan was not surprised, as Paris had historically been perfectly fine and had not been destroyed by a fierce fire.
By the way, Professor, why do you know so much about it?
Chapter 820, Young Ideals and Reality. Dumbledore was silent for a long time before he slowly said.
Because the prototype of this plan was something that we came up with together in our youth.
His eyes were filled with regret and nostalgia, and his thoughts seemed to drift back to that afternoon more than 100 years ago. He and Grindelwald sat across from each other, discussing the future of the wizarding world. He was a favorite chess player at the time, representing the Muggles as villains and playing against the wizards representing Grindelwald. Over the course of countless battles, they worked out roughly feasible routes and always believed that there were simply too many Muggles, and that there was only one way for a wizard to get to the front of the stage openly. The goal was to provoke a war between Muggles, and then use magic as a decisive force, controlling the weak to triumph over the strong, in order to reduce Muggle populations en masse and take over the world. He also naively believed that this was the only way to achieve their original vision.
It took Grindelwald several decades to perfect our original plan, and then, on that night, he infiltrated Hogwarts to lay it out for us, wanting to invite me to join him.
Dumbledore began.
You turned him down, didn't you?
Yvonne said, feeling a little wistful about the outcome. Grindelwald and Dumbledore were both extraordinarily powerful wizards, and if they could work together, one in the open and one in the dark, they might be able to achieve their goals.
No, I'm afraid you overestimate me, Hulse, as I hesitated to give him a clear answer the other night.
Dumbledore shook his head, closing his eyes as memories flooded his mind. He could still remember the night Grindelwald suddenly appeared in his lounge and told him that he had found the Deathly Hallows and that he had gathered enough men. With a nod of his head, the two of them could achieve their original vision. His feelings at the time were indescribable, as he had not been in contact with Grindelwald since Ariana's death. The two of them had not seen each other for decades, but the other party had not forgotten about him. In fact, they had been walking on the path that they had once imagined and had come up with an extremely perfect and feasible plan. The unattainable dream seemed within reach at the time.
I think it's possible for anyone to lose their mind in the face of the comforting words of a close friend and the dreams of their youth.
Ivan said soothingly. Emotions were Dumbledore's winning charm, but they were also his Achilles' heel. Dumbledore gave a noncommittal nod and then resumed his story, this time without comment, although Grindelwald presumably took his reaction as a refusal and did not contact him again for some time. It's just as well, because Dumbledore is not sure he can resist the temptation again.
At first, I had no intention of going against him, and we made a vow never to go against each other, although Grindelwald's idea was too radical, and I stubbornly believed it was a way out for the wizarding community.
Dumbledore added.
Then why did you change your mind in the end?
Yvonne asked, puzzled. Grindelwald's display of affection and the use of his adolescent desires as a trump card could be described as a move aimed at Dumbledore's weakness. Dumbledore, however, managed to hold back and in the end, put his own life on the line, which he found hard to understand.
Because Grindelwald's plan did not go well, and he faced far more resistance than we had anticipated, not only from the wizarding communities of the Americas and Europe, but also from the International Confederation of Wizards, who were making an enemy of the entire world.
Dumbledore exclaimed. Wizards like them were extremely powerful, and no number of ordinary Aurors could threaten their lives. However, there was a limit to how strong they could be, and 10 wizards like McGonagall, Snape, and Flitwick were enough to hold them back. Grindelwald was not strong enough to compel wizards who disagreed with him to do as he wished. Dumbledore could predict that even with his participation, it would probably end in a dead end.
I foresaw his defeat. As I had imagined, the situation deteriorated, and Grindelwald's methods became more and more insane, leading to the deaths of countless people.
Dumbledore's voice quavered.
I realized then that the wizards and muggles who died in the conflict were not pawns in the palm of our hands, that I had suffered the loss of a loved one and knew the pain of it.
Chapter 855. 855. You and I are just doing what is considered to be justice, 2 years ago. Chapter 821. You and I are just doing what is considered to be justice.
Are you telling me this because you want me to give up on trying to change the wizarding world, Professor?
Ivan asked after a long moment of silence. Being a nuisance, Ivan had no desire to spend his days worrying about how wizards and muggles should get along, preferring a life of leisure in which he attended classes and studied magic. However, things didn't go as planned. Lord Voldemort's resurrection disrupted his plans, and Fudge's relentless attacks forced Ivan to take drastic measures, such as attacking the Ministry. Before he knew it, the entire British wizarding community was under his control, accompanied by mounting pressure. After all, he was not Fudge, who could sit idly by and leave problems to their successors. It was for this reason that Ivan changed his mind. He wanted more than just to defeat Lord Voldemort, and Ivan wanted to do something real to make up for the damage he had done to the wizarding community.
I'm afraid you've misunderstood me, Hulse. If anyone could change the wizarding world, I'm sure it would be you,
said Dumbledore solemnly, looking at Ivan.
Whether it leads to heaven or to hell.
Ivan looked blank for a moment, then shook his head.
You think too highly of me, Professor,
Dumbledore said. Yvonne smiled sheepishly but did not reply. She knew her place. If the system had not provided her with the means to speed up her studies, Yvonne felt that she would be an excellent 5th year at best.
Besides, you are far more talented than the rest of us, and I have never seen anyone at the age of 14 or 15 able to win over 100 dark wizards and rule over the British wizarding community.
Dumbledore's eyes were fixed on Ivan through his curved spectacles, and he spoke slowly.
You have done what Voldemort would only dream of.
The originally harmonious atmosphere on the field suddenly turned cold. Yvonne was silent for a moment, but she did not deny it.
You knew, did Professor Snape tell you?
Although Ivan had long suspected that Dumbledore might know something about him, He could not help but feel nervous when it came down to it. Dumbledore shook his head.
I was wandering the wizarding world when I came across a lost wizard, a poor soul who had just broken free from the imperious curse and whose memory was in such a mess that he could not remember his own name.
Not. Ivan immediately guessed who Dumbledore was talking about. He did not expect this fellow, who had been missing for several days, to be so lucky as to bump into Dumbledore. No, it should be said that he was unlucky. Even as she was cursing him to herself, Ivan spoke up.
Not exactly a poor Nort. You should have seen the dark mark on his arm. He killed a lot of muggles and wizards.
What of the Aurors who died at the Ministry of Magic, and the innocent and injured clerks?
Dumbledore asked, his gaze sharpening.
Their deaths were in exchange for the lives of 71 elite Death Eaters. And do not forget that their escape from Azkaban and their return to the Dark Lord will only result in more destruction.
Ivan countered.
You could have ended the lives of those Death Eaters in Azkaban.
Dumbledore was faintly angry, his white hair and beard fluttering slightly with the force of his magic.
Fudge has caused enough trouble for the wizarding community, and his continued tenure as Minister for Magic will only drag everyone else down with him. I killed him to prevent more people from dying for his stupidity.
Yvonne insisted, not backing down. Ivan's dragons might continue to radiate from him, merging with Dumbledore's aura, causing the mahogany table in the center to tremble and crack.
What about you, Professor Dumbledore? What have you done for the wizarding community since Lord Voldemort's return?
I don't believe Professor Snape didn't report to you that Voldemort was planning to break out of prison. You had a chance to kill those Death Eaters, didn't you?
And still you didn't do it, because you thought that killing them might reveal Professor Snape's identity.
Ivan's questioning words cut into Dumbledore's mind like the sharpest knife, causing the centenarian to shrivel further. Dumbledore closed his eyes, visibly moved.
Perhaps you are right, Hulse. You and I are both willing to sacrifice innocent people for the sake of so-called justice in our hearts.
A few moments later, however, Dumbledore opened his eyes once more, and his haggard figure seemed to straighten as he spoke, his voice like a great bell.
If you insist on your righteousness, then prove it to me, Hulse.
Dumbledore's blue eyes shone with a strange light as he stared at Ivan, as if trying to read Ivan's face.
You intended to do this anyway, didn't you? To clear the last obstacle and avenge your father.
Chapter 822, Phoenix Blood. Ivan left the headmaster's office in the early evening with a scowl on his face. Behind him, the hideous stone beast sank slowly, making a dull noise. Glancing back at the closed stone door, Ivan sighed. As he had expected, Dumbledore simply could not accept his beliefs. Or perhaps it was because he could not accept the fact that he was gathering people in the name of justice, killing people, and abusing dark magic.
What are you thinking, Dumbledore?
Yvonne asked, walking slowly down the corridors of the castle, thinking back to their conversation in the headmaster's office. Dumbledore had told him all about Grindelwald's plan to take over the world, and in great detail, which was highly unreasonable. There was no need to go this far just to warn oneself. Was he not worried that he would one day copy Grindelwald's actions and start another war between Muggles and wizards? Ivan frowned, then turned his attention to the 2 glass bottles in his left hand, which Dumbledore had given him before he left the headmaster's office. There were wisps of white smoke floating in one of the glass bottles. As a legilimency master, Ivan could tell that these were memory threads most likely related to his father. The other glass bottle was filled with scarlet blood. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the blood emitted a faint golden glow. It was Phoenix blood. Ivan couldn't understand why the White Wizard would trust him with something like this, but when he thought about what the man had said, he understood. Dumbledore was an extremely conflicted individual, having witnessed the rise of Grindelwald and Lord Voldemort and not wishing for a third Dark Lord. On the other hand, as Dumbledore said himself, he was highly talented and was the most likely person to break the wizarding Muggle divide in centuries. Killing himself would be the end of any hope of change in the wizarding world.
Quite the confidence.
Ivan muttered grimly. Since Dumbledore met not and used his magic to comb through his memories, it is safe to assume that the White Wizard knew of his
Oisy.
defeat of Lord Voldemort. Despite this threat, Dumbledore still believed that Ivan's strength needed to be improved, a confidence that caused Ivan to feel somewhat uneasy, and he even wondered if he should simply find a place to hide for a while. Perhaps Dumbledore himself would die in 10 days or half a month.
Unfortunately, it didn't add any more legend points.
Chapter 823, Fusing the Phoenix Blood 1. On the morning of his day off, in the room of requirement, Ivan solemnly opened the glass bottle and poured the scarlet blood into the cauldron filled with potions. The next moment, the two liquids fused together and produced a magical reaction. It was as if high temperatures were boiling, causing bubbles to bubble up. By this time, the potion in the cauldron had changed from a chaotic mess to a brilliant golden red.
See,
Golden red flames emerging from the surface of the beating heart. The flames seemed to have received sufficient nourishment as they rapidly expanded into a fireball that engulfed the beating heart.
Body.
Fall apart and split into many pieces, but he did not panic. With a thought, the scattered flames automatically gathered. I've turned into a ball of fire? Ivan thought, amazed at how easily he was able to control the flames as he had been able to control his own body. After a short period of adaptation, Ivan was able to immerse himself in this wonderful state, experimenting with his new ability to target the room's tables, chairs, and cupboards, expending his magic to create more flames and destroy them without restraint. Protection mode over.
What an amazing ability.
Ivan muttered to himself as he emerged from the flames, looking at his hands and his perfectly fine robes. After confirming that he did not lose any limbs or clothes, Ivan quickly opened the system column to see the changes in his fused bloodline. Ivan Hells. Profession: Bloodline Wizard. Bloodline Fusion: 5 out of 7, Unicorn, Basilisk, Boggart, Norwegian Backbone, Phoenix. Magic Scale. Magic Column: Transformation Charm Level 7, 11,545 out of 12,800. Occlumency Level 7, 6,910 out of 12,800. Legilimency Level 7, 8,533 out of 12,800. Malicious Fire Charm Level 7, 9,270 out of 12,800.
Fire control.
Chapter 824, Controlling the Fierce Fire. Ivan was pleased with his new ability, but he expected more than that. If he could control fire, would he be able to control fire? With this in mind, Ivan experimented with his wand with great excitement. With a gentle wave, a small flame floated out of the tip of the wand. To Ivan's slight surprise, there was now a brilliant gold in the scarlet flames.
is it because of the phoenix blood?
Ivan asked, her mind racing. If he remembered correctly, the flame whip used by Dumbledore to seriously injure Voldemort was of a similar color.
I'm probably as strong as I was that night.
Ivan muttered to himself, looking at the marks left by the fierce fire. With his current strength, if he could return to that night in Knockoff Alley, he would not have to waste 5 legend points. Activating the system's protection mode would be enough to repel the Dark Lord.
Well, there's no point in dwelling on it.
Chapter 825, Is this bullying a sick and lonely old man? I wonder if this is considered bullying a sick, lonely old man? Ivan thought spitefully, but then pushed the thought aside. Dumbledore was no ordinary old man, and while this was a bit of a mean trick, integrity and life were certainly more important.
Orlando Howells.
Ivan whispered the man's name as he stared at the rippling water in the pensive after tossing the last empty glass bottle aside. It had been 5 years since his transmigration, and although he was essentially a visitor from another world, Ivan had always been curious about his father. However, Isaiah always tried to hide things from her and avoid all topics related to him, so it was only now that Ivan truly understood his father in name. However, even after scanning through these memories, Ivan still had little understanding of the conflict between Alicia and Dumbledore. While it is true that Dumbledore was responsible for Orlando Hills's death, there was a reason for it, and Alicia would not have hated the White Wizard so much if she had only seen him in memory. Looks like I'll have to go home to get to the bottom of this.
This could be a good opportunity to test my theory.
Ivan muttered to himself as he placed the pensive back in place. He closed his eyes and began to sense the phoenix power within him. Hot flames soon surrounded Ivan, enveloping him.
Now is the time.
Ivan's eyes snapped open and he waved his wand. Flames exploded all around him, filling the sky with flames that quickly engulfed him. The world spun, and when the flames finally died down, Ivan found himself outside Hogwarts Castle, in the Wizarding Market. As expected, Hogwarts' anti-phantom transfiguration array only worked on wizards. Ivan confirmed this. He had tried to use the power of the Phoenix to assist, but had easily broken through the protective array and successfully performed a spatial shift. This proved that there is more to the power of the blood than meets the eye. And, combined with Dumbledore's warnings some years ago, Ivan guessed that the blood magic listed in the system column was merely a rudimentary ability. For example, the Phoenix's blood gave him the ability to control fire, and at the same time, it enhanced his spatial magic. If he continued to dig, he might be able to resist the death curse and be reborn like Fawkes.
Sir Harles, what can I do for you?
Flan, who was in charge of guarding Ivan, immediately rushed over with a few werewolf wizards and asked cautiously.
What about my mother, Alicia?
Ivan asked.
Mrs. Harles isn't in the safe house right now.
Flan said.
She's probably gone back to the wizarding shop. Should I send someone to inform her?
No, it's fine. I'll go myself.
Ivan nodded, unsurprised. Although they were still under threat from Lord Voldemort and needed the protection of a safe house, the place was too dark and cold for long-term habitation.
By the way, according to Piers, the Ministry of Magic is in the process of reorganizing itself to get rid of any high-ranking officials who have ties to the Dark Lord. There are many important positions that will be left vacant, so do a good job. I have high hopes for you.
Ivan said with a smile as he patted Flan on the shoulder. As one of the first to join him, he was seen by Ivan as capable and loyal enough to take on higher office. However, Knockoff Alley still needed to be guarded, and Pierce had just stabilized the situation, so it would be unwise to immediately attack high-ranking officials from important departments. Ephraim's words excited Fran and the others. After the battle of the Ministry of Magic, Doggett, McNair, Gleason, and the others were all promoted to the post of head of department. After all, they were not bad at taking credit and were the first to join. Now that Ivan had made his stand, Fran and the others were relieved. This shows that Ivan has no intention of burning the bridge after crossing it, and will not be harsh on them because they are werewolves.
What a rare occasion. I thought you weren't planning on coming back for Christmas this year.
Chapter 826, Orlando Halls. Christmas. Ivan's expression turned awkward as he listened to Alicia. This was the first time he had seen her during the Christmas holidays. However, even this time, he came with a purpose.
You've said it so many times, I can always remember it once.
Yes, that's rare.
Alicia laughed and led Ivan inside. In her opinion, with Ivan's current level of magic, he would be able to apply for graduation after this year's OWL exam and would not waste any more time at Hogwarts. If he had to get an NEWT certificate, he could get the Ministry of Magic to approve an exam.
Well,
Ivan replied uncertainly. As Isaiah had said, the lessons taught at Hogwarts were meaningless to him. The only reason Ivan stayed at Hogwarts was to earn some GPA. However, as he grew stronger, his GPA became less useful to him. The two of them chatted all the way into the living room. Alicia pulled out a chair for Ivan to sit down and wait patiently, then went straight into the kitchen, where the sound of kitchenware clanging like a symphony could be heard. About half an hour later, Alicia appeared with a lavish turkey feast.
It's been a long time since I've made one. I hope my skills haven't deteriorated,
said Alicia, placing her plate on the table. She hadn't done much housework since Ivan brought Dobby the elf home, but now that Ivan was finally back on Christmas Day, Alicia was glad to cook for once.
Tell me, what is the main purpose of your return?
Alicia had already known that Ivan was not here to see her, so she did not wait for him to hesitate before asking.
No, I want to know something about my father.
Ivan said, no longer hesitating. The look on Alicia's face froze. She stared at Ivan for a long moment, then sighed.
I suppose you're right. It's time I told you.
As she spoke, she put down her plate and gestured for Ivan to sit down.
Your father's name was Orlando Howells, and he was once a Gryffindor student like you. He was very talented in magic.
It was a slow recount of the events that led up to her meeting Orlando. At the time, she was just a mischievous, dark magic Slytherin girl who liked to tease people.
We fought for 3 years, until we became familiar with each other and no longer viewed each other as enemies.
Yvonne guessed.
Yes, it was very sudden.
Alicia nodded. She still remembered how shocked and flustered she had been, and the nervous look in Orlando's eyes when she pretended to hesitate.
I didn't dislike him very much, so I set a test, and if he managed it, I agreed to go out with him.
Ivan looked at Alicia, eager to find out what the test was, but she had no intention of revealing it, so he skipped the subject. In short, they officially started dating soon after graduation, and their relationship became closer and closer. The 3 years of fighting did not cause any animosity between them, but instead, it caused their relationship to deepen.
But your father, Orlando, didn't see it that way. He wanted to stay to fight to be with his friends.
Chapter 827, Divergence.
Orlando was determined to follow Dumbledore into battle against Lord Voldemort's Death Eaters in order to save the wizarding community from the Dark Lord's terror.
Orlando was determined to follow Dumbledore into battle against Lord Voldemort's Death Eaters in order to save the wizarding community from the Dark Lord's terror. However, your father wanted to do more, so he chose not only to join the Order of the Phoenix, but also to pass his Ministry of Magic exam a year after his graduation and become an Auror.
Didn't Minister Barnott inform Dumbledore of this operation when he planned it?
Ivan asked suspiciously. He had heard this story from Mr. Dudgeon 2 years ago, but at the time he had no intention of getting to the bottom of the matter and had neglected to ask many questions. Given the Ministry's knowledge of Lord Voldemort's movements and the amount of manpower they had deployed, why hadn't Millicent Barnott invited Dumbledore along? The entire wizarding community knows that Dumbledore is the only one capable of fighting against Lord Voldemort.
This is why I hate your headmaster.
Said Alicia sarcastically, a cold look on her face.
Minister Barnott repeatedly begged Dumbledore to step out of Hogwarts and take over as Minister for Magic.
She believed that Dumbledore had rejected the position of Minister for Magic because he was afraid of dying. As Minister for Magic, after all, he had to bear the responsibility of fighting Voldemort to the death. Ivan was silent as he listened to Alicia's story, puzzled. He did not know much about the war more than a decade ago, but it seems that the righteous side was more inclined to fight their own battles, or Dumbledore would not have needed to secretly form a wizarding community, and the war would not have gone on for 11 years without a winner. At first, Ivan thought Minister Millicent Barnott was too keen on power and afraid of Dumbledore stealing it from her, so they could not work closely together. However, according to Alicia, this did not seem to be the case, as Millicent Barnott was a minister who could see the bigger picture and had repeatedly invited Dumbledore to succeed her. Ivan could only imagine what it would be like to have a minister for magic who could stand up to or even defeat the Dark Lord in the height of the Voldemort-infested wizarding war. As he did at Knockturn Alley after defeating Lord Voldemort in front of everyone, the celebrated mystic fell from grace in the minds of the wizards of Knockturn Alley, and Death Eaters like Malfoy and Crabbe, who were not strong-minded, immediately switched sides.
After that incident, I got a good look at the false face of Albus Dumbledore, who, rather than risk his life, ordered his students and admirers to fight the dangerous Death Eaters.
After learning that Dumbledore had turned down the position of Minister for Magic on a number of occasions, she was strongly against Orlando's continued membership of the Order of the Phoenix. However, Orlando placed a lot of trust in Dumbledore, and they soon had their second disagreement.
This time, I did not back down. I withdrew from the Order of the Phoenix and asked him to leave Britain with me and go to America, where he would not be involved. As such, we had a huge argument.
Said Alicia with a complicated look on her face. Orlando did not change his mind, however. and was unable to abandon his comrades in arms whom he had fought alongside for many years to become cowards and deserters. What's more, Orlando grew up in the British wizarding community, and it was his home and his country.
I'm very worried about hearing from him one day, and I don't want you to be born without a father,"
said Alicia, closing her eyes in pain. She had thought of many ways to change Orlando's mind, but all of them had failed, and her actions had alienated them.
"Does father know about your pregnancy?"
Chapter 828, Bone de Patrid. Ivan hesitated for a long time. He did not want to judge their choice. When their home was in danger, it was necessary for someone to stand up for them without hesitation. Orlando's insistence was understandable, as Sirius, Arthur, and the others described him as a staunch warrior and a worthy hero. In contrast, despite her self-interest, Alicia was not a British witch or wizard, nor was she obligated to dedicate herself to the cause of anti-dark magic. She was merely acting as a wife and mother.
What happened then? How did my father Orlando?
Ivan asked. Isaiah's voice sounded shaky.
We were separated for a long time after that terrible fight, and all I know is that he was working for the Order of the Phoenix and the Ministry of Magic, fighting those dangerous Death Eaters.
I was very, very worried about Orlando's safety.
The ultimate emotion is the most powerful magic, and if an alchemist can infuse it into a magical object, it will greatly enhance its power, even giving the object the ability to resist the death curse.
Alicia sat in a daze.
Is that why you made the crescent pendant?
Ivan asked suddenly. He had previously speculated that the crescent moon pendant was not specially prepared for him. After all, Nicholas Flamel had told him that this magical object had been made over a decade ago, but Alicia had kept it sealed until he was in school.
Yes, the pendant I gave you.
Alicia nodded and sighed sadly.
It took me 9 months and a great deal of material to create it. I worked hard for it, hoping it would protect your father in my place.
At this point, Alicia's emotions became more and more agitated, her clear eyes filling with tears and her voice shaking.
I waited for 2 days, but Orlando did not return until the night of the 3rd day, when Albus Dumbledore suddenly came to me with bad news, and a corpse.
Alicia's voice broke and tears welled up in her eyes. She could not forget that dark day, or Dumbledore's apologetic declaration that Orlando was an admirable hero. From that moment on, she loathed the word.
Hera.
If it was so good, but why didn't Dumbledore die himself, to be a hero? Alicia's expression was ferocious, as she fiercely questioned Dumbledore about why Orlando had not returned for so many days, and why there had been no response to her letter to Orlando. However, the response sent a chill down Alicia's spine, and during her argument with Orlando, Dumbledore realized that there was a traitor in the Order of the Phoenix, and that someone was passing information to Voldemort, causing them to lose many members.
And so I was added to their list of suspects, because I was a selfish Slytherin who caused a scene in the Order of the Phoenix and hated Albus Dumbledore.
Said Alicia coldly.
What about father? Does he want to believe you?
Yvonne asked, realizing as soon as she opened her mouth that it was too late to change her mind.
I don't know.
Alicia looked suddenly panicked.
I guess I went too far when I tried to stop him from working for the Order of the Phoenix. Anyway, he didn't come to see me for months. He just wrote me letters once in a while, and I always turned him down. Maybe he was still mad at me.
Or maybe he's just in love with you and doesn't want you to go out on a limb with him.
Ivan suggested, trying to comfort her. It seemed likely that Orlando was genuinely hoping that Alicia would leave the Order, back out of the fight, or even go to the safety of the American wizarding community on her own and come back when everything was over.
I hate myself. If only I had been tougher and forced Orlando to leave with me.
Chapter 829, I Will Definitely Win.
The Phoenix blocked my spell, and Albus Dumbledore didn't give me another chance to attack. He reminded me that I had more important things to do.
Said Alicia, looking at Ivan in a daze. When she learned of Orlando's death, she was devastated. Had it not been for her unborn child, she would have lost her will to live. Ivan averted his gaze from Alicia, feeling somewhat guilty. He could feel how much Alicia cherished her only child, almost as if it were the only thing keeping her alive, and yet he was inside her.
Who was the Death Eater who killed my father?
Ivan asked,
I took care of that man 15 years ago.
said Alicia with unusual detachment. She learned of Orlando's death from Dumbledore and knew who killed him, and her belief in revenge did not allow her to wait more than a decade. However, at the height of Voldemort's power, and with her pregnancy, she had to lie low and wait. Fortunately, things took a turn for the better. Not long after she gave birth to Ivan, the powerful you-know-who suddenly collapsed. The arrogant Death Eaters were captured, and the few that managed to escape were scattered around Knockturn Alley in terror. The wizard who killed Orlando was also lucky enough not to be caught by the Aurors. In a sense, however, the other party might prefer to be locked up in Azkaban rather than lose their lives.
He was not weak, and he was inseparable from his two companions. It took me a lot of time to plot his death, and I met Doggett by accident while searching for him. Then something happened, so I stayed in Knockturn Alley.
Alicia explained slowly. Ivan nodded. He had wondered why an alchemist like Alicia would stay in a place like Knockturn Alley, and now he understood.
So the only ones left to deal with are Dumbledore and Voldemort.
Ivan muttered, which was probably why Alicia had been reluctant to discuss Orlando with him. Since the Death Eaters who killed Orlando had been consigned to Hell, there were only two powerful wizards left who were indirectly connected. Lord Voldemort was the one who started the war, and the Death Eaters were acting on his orders. He was responsible for Orlando's death. Dumbledore, on the other hand, had a complicated situation, as he misread the situation and named Alicia as a possible traitor, thus disrupting her meeting with Orlando. Even though Ivan also felt that Alicia's performance at the time was questionable, it was ultimately the result of Dumbledore's misjudgment. Otherwise, Orlando would have had a good chance of surviving the impact of the Crescent. Additionally, Ivan was baffled by Dumbledore's repeated refusal to take up the post of Minister for Magic. Dumbledore was the wizarding community's only hope of defeating Voldemort before Harry was born, and leading the resistance was almost the best solution. Ivan could not understand, but he knew that this was not the time to think about it. Regardless of the truth of the matter and whether Dumbledore had his reasons, his battle with him was inevitable. With that in mind, Ivan said,
I'll have Pierce send someone to find out where Lord Voldemort is, but it might take some time. Until then, I'll prioritize Dumbledore.
As Ivan was speaking, Alicia grabbed his arm and interrupted him with a complicated look on her face.
No, forget it,
Said Alicia with a sigh, wiping the tears from her eyes. A few months ago, after Lord Voldemort's sudden appearance at Knockturn Alley and her confrontation with Ivan, she suddenly realized that she cared more about Ivan's safety than her supposed revenge. The outcome of the battle was good, as Voldemort was beaten and forced to flee, but nobody in the wizarding world knew how strong Dumbledore was, as he was feared even by the victorious Lord Voldemort.
What's the matter? Did Albus Dumbledore give you trouble at school?
Acutely aware of the change in Ivan's expression, Alicia's mollified expression became one of anger. She hadn't expected Dumbledore to be so relentless when she was ready to move on. As for Ivan's efforts to rally the troops and take over the Ministry of Magic, she thought nothing of it.
I think you're mistaken, Mother. I was the one who intended to deal with him as a precautionary measure.
Ivan said with mock confidence. Ivan did not reveal his intention of dueling Dumbledore the next day, as he was worried about Alicia.
Don't worry, I'll be fine, I promise.
Chapter 830, You're More Dangerous Than Me, Hars.
Disillusionment.
With a spatial shift, Ivan disappeared down Knockturn Alley, and when he returned to his senses, he was in a small, deserted village with a towering church in front of him.
You are much later than I had hoped, Harles.
Dumbledore said quietly, turning stiffly to face Ivan as he entered the church.
I didn't want to go to the appointment.
Ivan shrugged and teased.
You are correct. Perhaps I should thank you for that.
Dumbledore raised his eyebrows. As Ivan had said, his body would not last more than a few days, and there was little he could do if Ivan avoided him. Ivan sighed. He did not want to fight Dumbledore if he could help it, as he was not really.
Ivan howls.
and did not feel Orlando's death that deeply.
I heard from my mother that Minister Barnott repeatedly offered you the position of Minister for Magic, to become the leader of the resistance.
Ivan asked, puzzled, something he had never understood. Dumbledore was silent for a moment, looking at Ivan intently before speaking slowly.
That's because the most dangerous person in the wizarding world was never Grindelwald or Lord Voldemort.
Dumbledore said softly, his tone normal without a trace of arrogance, as if he were simply stating a fact. Ivan's pupils contracted, and he froze in shock, but Dumbledore continued speaking.
A powerful and unrestrained wizard is dangerous, as were Grindelwald and Lord Voldemort. I am more powerful than they are, and naturally more dangerous.
Dumbledore said frankly, his thoughts drifting as he walked away from the dais. He had always known that he was not a selfless or noble man, and had lost count of the number of chilling thoughts that had crossed his mind over the past century. After Ariana's death, he desperately sought the Deathly Hallows, one of the most important reasons being to bring his sister back to life in order to redeem himself.
I once resented fate, and believed that I was gifted enough to do everything I wanted to do to make the wizarding world work under my will.
Dumbledore began. He knew exactly what he was capable of, and the last time he decided to go all out was in a duel with Grindelwald decades ago. Dumbledore won the duel very decisively, even with Grindelwald's strongest wand. After defeating Grindelwald and gaining possession of the Elder Wand, his power became even more unstoppable. Dumbledore was shrewd enough to find that his own limitations were almost negligible compared to temptation, so that his evil thoughts and greed sometimes overwhelmed his good intentions and caused irreparable harm. Such as Ariana's death, or his reluctance to return James Potter's cloak of invisibility, causing Harry's parents to lose their only hope of escape.
To this end, I made 3 vows to myself, to repress my growing desire.
Dumbledore said solemnly, striding up to Ivan.
I will not touch power, will not use the dark arts, will not kill.
It was for these 3 reasons that he put up with Fudge jumping up and down in front of him, and ignoring Lord Voldemort's antics in the British wizarding community. It was only when the others' actions became intolerable to him that Dumbledore prudently formed a Order of the Phoenix to lead righteous wizards against them. He repeatedly refused the position of Minister for Magic, because he knew he would not be able to keep his true heart under the corruption of power.
But today, I fear, I will have to break some of my vows.
Dumbledore stopped in his tracks, his momentum reaching its peak, and a storm seemed to hang over the church as the magical energy dissipated.
I must say, you are a remarkable wizard. Not many people are as self-disciplined as you.
Chapter 831, The Burning Church.
A coward, eh?
Dumbledore murmured, raising his eyebrows, but he made no attempt to contradict her.
If you insist, then prove it.
Dumbledore's expression became grave, and he raised his left hand, clutching his wand to his chest and bowing slightly. Ivan, who was sitting directly across from him, knew that this was the etiquette of a duel between wizards. He took a deep breath, raised his wand, and slowly bowed in return. Golden-red phoenixes flew over the church, making fairy music, as if they were witnesses to an epic duel. When Xanadu stopped abruptly, Ivan waved his wand without warning, and 3 dark lights flashed through the air. However, such an obvious method of attack was clearly not going to work, as Dumbledore merely flicked his wrist, and a white semicircular shield shot out from the tip of his wand. The black beam of light kept hitting the shield, producing muffled sounds. Soon, cracks appeared on the surface of the shield.
Reducto, shattered to pieces.
Ivan was relentless, closing the distance between them as he cast another spell, shattering the barrier in front of him. Dumbledore took his time, and with a quick swipe of the wand in his left hand, the long table on the platform flew down and blocked Ivan's smashing charm. He then lifted his wand slightly, and the remains of the broken table followed his instructions, turning into sharp steel needles that scattered towards Ivan. A torrent of scarlet flames suddenly appeared in front of Ivan, creating a thick wall of fire that prevented Dumbledore from fighting back. After Ivan increased the output of his magic, a fireball the size of a person's head emerged from the firewall and slammed into Dumbledore like a cannon.
This is as far as you go.
Dumbledore suddenly said, and the wand in his left hand emitted a golden light. With a gentle sweep, the wall of fire that blocked his path was sliced apart, and the fireballs that filled the sky were annihilated. He was sick and tired of this tentative exchange of blows. If it was just this intensity, they would probably fight to the end of the day. Ivan understood this, and so wisps of flame began to drift out of the tip of the wand. Unlike before, these flames were not the usual scarlet red, but an eerie white that expanded several times its original size upon contact with air.
Confringo, exploding thunder.
Using fire as a shield, Ivan cast the most powerful spell he could control. The white flames swept past the wall of fire, using everything as nourishment. As they continued to expand, they gradually transformed into a powerful fire dragon that roared as it charged forward. Dumbledore's calm face became grave for the first time, as he could clearly sense the threat posed by the flames.
End of all curses.
Dumbledore read. Incomparably magical power spread out in all directions from Dumbledore, like a circular wall, keeping the terrible fire at bay. The two terrible forces collided, and the whole church shook with the sound of the explosion. Ivan, however, was well aware that Dumbledore had not been consumed by his fire, and that the barrier created by his special spell, Oblivion, was stronger than he thought. Although the defensive barrier was gradually shrinking under his relentless attacks, it still seemed as stable as a mountain. Dumbledore, in the midst of the flames, explained slowly, as if he were conducting a normal lesson.
The all curses' final curse was created to deal with such an extremely dangerous dark magic.
Ivan perceives Dumbledore's hidden meaning and believes that
All spells end
is a counter to fire curses, which would be impractical to break through.
Really, how about this?
Dumbledore's words did not affect Ivan's mood, and his deep voice echoed through the church.
Crosses flying.
Chapter 832, Phoenix's Cry. In an instant, Ivan was caught between life and death, his face ashen, as Dumbledore cast a spell far more powerful than he had ever imagined, one that seemed to contain the other's will.
Sectum Sempra, God's Edge Shadowless.
The invisible magic blade passed through the barrier of the Sea of Fire and slashed at the phoenix that was devouring the flames like a thick sword. Dumbledore flicked his wand, and a broken stone pillar flew up in front of Fox. However, he apparently underestimated the power of the Obscurus. The powerful blade of magic sliced the stone pillar in half, and the remaining edge pierced Fox's body. Golden red blood spilled down, and the pain made the proud phoenix cry out.
Out of the frying pan.
Chapter 833, The End of the Old Era. Ivan hesitated, deciding that there was no point in fighting any further. However, Dumbledore did not seem to think so. With a grim expression, he waved his wand again, and the collapsed wall tiles quickly stacked up.
Shattered.
After a brief confrontation, Ivan was the first to break the silence, as a thin beam of light shot from the tip of his wand and disappeared in midair. Perhaps due to the need to concentrate on suppressing his right hand's injury, Dumbledore did not waste his magic on conjuring a shield, but instead used a fist-sized rock to block the incoming spell beam.
Crucio heart-wrenching, petrificus.
Ivan's relentless attacks left no room for Dumbledore to breathe, forcing him to defend himself. Dumbledore was like the most dexterous of trick masters, easily fending off Ivan's attacks with only a few basic, low magic consumption spells. Ivan took his time, once again increasing the intensity of his attack. Terrifying flames appeared out of thin air and condensed into a fireball, which exploded across the ruined church. Dumbledore had no choice but to conjure a few more stone golems to act as shields against the blast. Such a large-scale transfer of magic caused Dumbledore's injuries to worsen, and the blackened scars quickly spread to the right side of his face, causing his smooth, spell-casting movements to slow for a moment.
The Shadowless Blade.
Cried Ivan, seizing the opportunity to launch a final, incisive attack, sending an invisible blade of magic hurtling toward Dumbledore. Under the pressure of death, Dumbledore was no longer distracted by suppressing his injuries, and the stone guard next to Dumbledore's wand disintegrated into a stone shield. The blade of magic struck the stone shield with a bone-jarring bang, and the two of them exploded after a moment of stalemate. Dumbledore took a few steps back to avoid the flying debris, and in the dust kicked up by the explosion, a scarlet beam of light suddenly flew towards him without warning. Disarming charm. Not expecting Ivan to try to end his life with such non-lethal magic in a battle like this, Dumbledore tried to disapparate. Ivan's voice, however, rang out.
Out of body.
A strange, hazy feeling began to take over his mind, as if it were trying to pull thoughts from his brain. As a legilimency master, Dumbledore was able to break free of the imperious curse in less than a second, despite his poor condition. However, in the heat of battle, every moment counted. Ivan's imperious curse did not work, but it achieved its core purpose, and Dumbledore's apparition was forced to stop.
Wand coming!
Cried Ivan, startled. He cast a spell and a blackened wand flew out of the flames. Ignoring the burning sensation, Ivan reached out and grabbed the wand, realizing that Dumbledore had not been using the wand he had been expecting.
Disillusionment.
Chapter 868. 868 There were no Voldemorts in the wizarding world, or perhaps everyone was Voldemort, 2 years ago. Chapter 834. There were no Voldemorts in the wizarding world, or perhaps everyone was Voldemort.
You always guard against me even when you're dead.
Ivan said with a sigh. He had some ideas about the strongest wand, as he had personally experienced its power 3 years ago. It would be a pity if such a powerful Deathly Hallows were to fall. Ivan immediately decided to search the headmaster's office carefully after the aftermath was done. While Ivan was lost in his thoughts, there was a noise at the front door and he turned to see Pierce. When the acting minister received the news from Ivan, he immediately realized the gravity of the situation and hurried over without a single subordinate. When he saw Dumbledore's body on the ground, even Pierce, who had expected this, gasped.
Sir Harles, what is going on? Why would Dumbledore?
Ivan interrupted, setting the tone of the conversation.
I understand, Sir Harles. I'll immediately send out a bolo for you-know-who in the British wizarding community.
Piers was, after all, the acting minister, and was quick to make a decision. Despite being on the ministry's most wanted list after Lord Voldemort's attack on the headquarters more than half a month ago, it was only for show, and not many Aurors were sent out to find him. However, things were different now. After only half a month, Lord Voldemort had struck again, killing Albus Dumbledore, a white wizard with great influence in the wizarding world. Pierce immediately decided to have the Aurors put up wanted posters for Lord Voldemort on every street in order to show the Ministry of Magic's importance. It didn't matter what the truth was.
Also, remember to organize Dumbledore's funeral tomorrow.
Ivan reminded him solemnly. Pierce nodded quickly, taking Ivan's orders to heart, but his expression grew even more strange as he left.
Albus Dumbledore was a great headmaster who dedicated his life to fighting the dark arts, defeating the dark wizard Grindelwald. When the mystic rose from the depths of hell intending to return, Albus was the first to warn us.
Chapter 835. The Great Wizard's Funeral. At the funeral, more and more people did the same as Pierce, taking off their hats and bowing in respect of the Great White Wizard. The low whimpering grew louder, and as Dumbledore's body was buried, many wept uncontrollably, unable to hide their emotions. For a time, an atmosphere of sadness hung over Hogwarts. Ivan stood among the students, looking at Hermione and the others who were quietly sobbing with mixed feelings. He could not imagine what his friends would think of him if they knew that Dumbledore had died in a duel with him.
Wait!
Ivan had just finished his dinner and was leaving the entrance hall when a gruff voice sounded behind him. Yvonne turned to see Moody walking towards them, leaning on his cane.
What is it, Professor Moody?
Ivan asked, his expression unchanging as he tried to keep his guard up.
I heard from Pierce that you were the one who first found Albus's body. Is that correct?
Moody asked as he hurried over to Ivan and fixed him with his magical gaze.
Yes, that's right.
Yvonne said, nodding sadly.
I'd like you to give me a full description of what happened at the time.
Moody's expression was grave, and he paused before continuing.
I read the ministry's notice this morning, but a lot of it was very vague. To tell you the truth, I find it hard to believe that Albus is dead.
Flitwick, Lupin, and the others came out of the Great Hall, their faces still dark with grief, and Professor McGonagall's eyes slightly red, presumably from crying in secret.
Actually, I don't know much.
Ivan looked at the members of the Order of the Phoenix and sighed.
As you know, at the end of the last year, after Voldemort's return, I refused Professor Dumbledore's invitation to go to your safe house because of my mother, Alicia.
Yvonne spoke fluently of the speech she had thought of. Given the circumstances, Ivan only told Moody and the others that by the time he got there, Voldemort had fled and Dumbledore was dying.
You mean Albus was alive at the time?
Moody asked quickly. Sirius, Lupin, and the others were also surprised.
That's right, Voldemort was no match for Professor Dumbledore, and by the time I got there, the professor had defeated him.
Ivan said confidently. Then why?
You should have seen Professor Dumbledore's body. Apparently, he was ambushed by you-know-who's dark magic. By the time I got there, he didn't have the strength to move.
Moody and the others nodded. They had examined Dumbledore's body and found that half of it had been eroded by dark magic.
Did the headmaster order you to do anything?
McGonagall asked.
Why would he be in an abandoned village church, fighting you-know-who?
All Professor Dumbledore told me was that he was looking for something.
Ivan slowly shook his head, indicating that Dumbledore had been barely alive when he found him, and that it was difficult for him to even speak, thus not leaving much information behind.
What's he after?
Moody muttered to himself, frowning. Lupin and Sirius looked at each other with vague speculation.
Don't tell me it's you-know-who's soul.
Sirius began, but Lupin glared at him, forcing him to swallow his words.
You know about this?
Moody asked, his left hand clutching Sirius's arm tightly.
If I'm not mistaken, that's the one. No wonder we haven't seen Dumbledore lately.
Sirius said grimly. In his opinion, the only thing that Dumbledore would go to such lengths to find was you-know-who's Horcrux. This explains Dumbledore's sudden appearance in such a remote location, where Lord Voldemort would surely have hidden the Horcrux.
Don't make it sound like a riddle, Sirius. What is it that Albus is after?
McGonagall asked Sirius, looking at him unhappily.
Forgive me if I don't say this, Professor McGonagall, but this concerns the secret of you-know-who's immortality, and Dumbledore has asked us to keep it strictly confidential.
Sirius's expression was uncertain.
But now that Albus is dead, you don't have to keep it a secret.
Moody said angrily, thumping his cane.
We have to figure out what's going on and how to get rid of you-know-who.
Flitwick, Pince, and the others all stared at Sirius, agreeing with Moody. Lupin, on the other hand, smiled wryly and said,
I think Headmaster Dumbledore is doing the right thing. The fewer people who know about such evil dark magic, the better.
When he saw that Lupin and Sirius were determined to keep it a secret, Moody became furious, his eyes bulging. He had been an Auror for decades and had definitely seen more dark magic than anyone present.
What do you say, Severus? This is about you-know-who. Surely you know something.
Chapter 836, Helpless Snape. McGonagall's words reminded everyone present. Moody, Sirius, and Lupin immediately turned to look at Snape, who they all knew was Dumbledore's spy on Voldemort. Despite the former Death Eater's dubious loyalty, he was indeed the only one who might have some information. Yvonne looked at him too, her eyes assessing. Before returning Dumbledore's body to Hogwarts, he had already tested Snape's reaction, but Ivan was unsure if Snape would suddenly turn on him. Under everyone's watchful eyes, Snape was silent for a moment, then he gave Ivan a long look and spoke.
Hales was right. Dumbledore has been searching for something hidden by the Dark Lord for months, and it does concern the secret of the Dark Lord's immortality.
Ivan breathed a sigh of relief at Snape's words. Things were not going to go as badly as he had hoped. Before Ivan could fully relax, however, Moody demanded aggressively.
But didn't you tell us you had no idea where Albus was, Severus? That was an order from Headmaster Dumbledore. He told me to keep it a secret and not to tell anyone.
Snape explained calmly. Professor McGonagall raised her voice and asked.
You're telling me that Albus only told you about this without telling all of us.
She looked very surprised, and her voice was full of suspicion. Sirius was equally adamant.
That's impossible. But that's the truth, and it's clear Dumbledore thinks I'm more trustworthy than you.
Snape said sarcastically. Lupin, Moody, and the others glared at Snape, and Sirius pulled up his sleeve as if to punch him. Snape seemed to understand that he would be beaten if this continued, and he spoke again before the crowd's patience ran out.
Because I saved his life, and allowed him to live a little longer.
Sirius and the others froze, and Professor McGonagall asked.
What did you say? You saved Albus.
Snape did not immediately respond to this, instead changing the subject.
3 years ago, there was a riot at Hogwarts. You remember that, don't you?
McGonagall, Flitwick, and Mrs. Pince all nodded. Sirius and the others were not at Hogwarts at the time, but they had probably heard about it. Ivan was horrified.
Yes, it was Lord Voldemort. He controlled Lockhart through a powerful dark magic object, and even I was tricked by him.
Snape's face grew strange, and he seemed about to say something but stopped himself. Lupin offered words of comfort.
It wasn't your fault, Harles. You were too young for even a grown wizard to withstand the powers of a you-know-who.
Sirius agrees, as he was nearly killed by Voldemort's Horcruxes when the Black family home was destroyed. Perhaps unable to bear the discomfort, Snape quickly continued. After that incident, Dumbledore discovered the secret of the Dark Lord's immortality, presumably in connection with powerful dark magic artifacts, and pursued them.
A little over a year ago, he managed to find one of the dark arts items that the Dark Lord had hidden, but unfortunately triggered a trap set by the Dark Lord when he was trying to destroy it. Dumbledore was badly injured and nearly died, and I had to brew a potion to temporarily suppress his injuries.
Snape said slowly.
He needed me to keep him alive and to give him information on the Dark Lord, so he told me many things.
Albus was injured this badly over a year ago. Why didn't he just tell us?
McGonagall asked, frowning.
Tell you what, how can you help?
Snape said abruptly.
He doesn't want you to panic, and he doesn't want the Ministry or the Dark Lord to know he's in bad shape.
McGonagall, Sirius, and the others choked. Dumbledore was widely acknowledged to be the most powerful white wizard in the wizarding world, second to none in terms of magical prowess. If even the two of them could not break the mystery man's spell, then they were equally helpless.
That's all I know. Headmaster Dumbledore rarely contacted me during this school year, but I think he was planning to do something for the wizarding community while he could still move.
Snape added. The members of the Order of the Phoenix fell completely silent. Combined with Ivan's words, they were able to picture what had happened. Dumbledore must have wanted to find and destroy all of the dark items that you-know-who had created, while he could still suppress his injuries. Unfortunately, you-know-who must have sensed this, as they engaged in a fierce battle for unknown reasons, and Dumbledore managed to fight off Lord Voldemort. Professor McGonagall sighed.
Poor Albus. He shouldn't have taken all the danger upon himself.
She was well aware that it was a very dangerous job, or Dumbledore would not have died so tragically, but they were also unafraid of sacrifice, and Dumbledore had done enough for the wizarding community.
Thank you for telling us this, Severus.
Moody said soothingly, then quickly changed his tone and continued.
But how can you prove you're telling the truth? We shouldn't be so suspicious of him, Alistair.
Lupin scowled.
Remember, Severus gave us no warning when you-know-who attacked the Ministry.
Moody interrupted. Because the Dark Lord had never attacked the Ministry of Magic, Snape's breath caught in his throat and he looked as if he could not hold it in any longer. He gave Ivan an extremely resentful look and then explained helplessly.
Voldemort didn't trust me very much, presumably because he found out there was a traitor among the Death Eaters and was afraid I'd let you know.
Moody thought for a moment but did not argue. Snape was often at Hogwarts and no one could be sure which side he was on. A plot as large as Voldemort's had come within a hair's breadth of capturing the Ministry and fulfilling his nefarious plan to rule Britain. As Snape put it, Lucius's sudden change of allegiance disrupted Voldemort's well-laid plans, leading to the deaths of many elite Death Eaters at the Ministry. Perhaps worried that he would be questioned about something he did not know, Snape threw out another piece of shocking news.
As I understand it, Dumbledore made a will in the form of a magical contract, which was kept at Gringotts, and it will be officially announced in a few days' time.
Chapter 837, Snape, It's Too Hard for Me.
A will?
Professor McGonagall stared at Snape in shock, but quickly recovered. Since Headmaster Dumbledore knew he had little time left, he arranged everything in advance. Realizing this, Sirius and the others relaxed a little. The news of Dumbledore's death came so suddenly that they were overwhelmed, unsure what to do next and how to confront you-know-who. Now that they had a will, at least they were no longer clueless. However, this was not good news for Ivan, as he could not be certain what kind of message Dumbledore would leave in his will, whether it would be beneficial or harmful to him.
How much more are you hiding from us, Severus?
Moody asked, looking at Snape unhappily.
Actually, I don't know any more than you do.
Snape continued, shaking his head.
You'll know about the will in a few days, even if I don't say anything. What brings you here, Harles?
Snape asked. Yvonne did not reply immediately. Instead, she waved her wand gently, creating a barrier around her that kept out the noise.
I can't believe you spoke up for me just now.
Snape explained slowly, his eyes narrowing. More importantly, of course, he was well aware of the situation. Despite the sheer number of members of the Order of the Phoenix, Snape was certain that all of them combined would be no match for Ivan Howells, and that the choice between life and death would not be so difficult.
Sometimes not having a choice is the best choice.
Ivan teased.
I'm more of a believer in tangible bargains than in such ephemeral things.
Snape replied calmly.
So you do have some interesting information.
Yvonne asked, raising an eyebrow.
The Dark Lord?
Snape asked confidently. With Dumbledore dead, the only threat to the British wizarding community was Voldemort. Yvonne didn't argue the point, simply nodding.
Right, do you know where he's hiding? Or who the secret keeper is?
Ivan had learned about Lord Voldemort from Lucius and the others 2 weeks earlier, and knew that the Dark Lord was under the protection of the Fidelius charm. However, due to the limitations of this spell, neither Lucius nor Crabbe were able to directly pinpoint the location.
I don't know yet, but I might be able to find it.
Snape was somewhat moved by this. The infamous Dark Lord, the most powerful.
In other words, you intend to remain a Death Eater and pass information on to me about the Dark Lord, as you did to Headmaster Dumbledore.
Ivan asked, examining Snape critically.
You may think so.
Snape said, then paused and added pleadingly.
In exchange for killing the Dark Lord, I want you to clean my name.
Ivan agreed with a nod of his head.
You will be the greatest contributor to the defeat of the Dark Lord. That won't be necessary. I just hope to live a normal life from now on without being disturbed.
Snape said noncommittally. Yvonne smiled but did not respond, choosing instead to direct the question at him.
Since you work for me now, I have something I need you to answer truthfully.
Snape looked at Ivan in surprise, unsure what he meant.
What exactly did Headmaster Dumbledore do during the months he was gone? And did he give you any special instructions?
Yvonne enunciated each word, her eyes following Snape's every move as if trying to read his face. Dumbledore's behavior has been rather strange of late, especially since the headmaster was nowhere to be found at Hogwarts, except on the first day of school. With Dumbledore's disregard for the Ministry's attempt to impeach him, Ivan found it hard to imagine what could have caused the White Wizard to put aside all his important work. If this had happened in the original timeline, it might have been explained away by the discovery of the Horcrux's whereabouts, but now that Voldemort had been beaten nearly to autism, Ivan did not believe that Dumbledore would care so much about Horcruxes. What puzzled Ivan the most was Dumbledore's performance in the duel yesterday. Dumbledore was able to keep his head above water when he gave up his Elder Wand and was badly injured. This is far beyond Ivan's wildest expectations of Dumbledore's power. If the strongest White Wizard really had such terrifying power, then when they met Voldemort at the end of last year, the two of them could have captured him alive and brought him to the Ministry of Magic for trial. Ivan turned to Snape, the only one who might know the truth. Under Ivan's vaguely menacing pressure, Snape struggled to speak.
Hales, as I have explained before, I do not know where Headmaster Dumbledore is, and he has not contacted me of his own accord.
Is that so?
Yvonne was dubious. She knew how much Dumbledore trusted Snape, and if he had something up his sleeve, he would know it. Ivan's questioning gaze made Snape feel very helpless, and then he spoke again as if he had suddenly remembered something.
By the way, there's one thing I can tell you. The potion I brew for Headmaster Dumbledore regularly wore off before the summer holidays of the school year, and he should never have lasted this long.
Chapter 838, The Dark Lord's Summoning. His words caught Ivan's attention. As the best potions master in Britain, Snape's judgment could be trusted. And this was consistent with his earlier prediction.
You mean Dumbledore may be long dead?
Ivan muttered to himself, but quickly dismissed this as unlikely. If that was the case, who had dueled him before? Not to mention, he had identified Dumbledore's body, and there was no way to disguise such a serious injury.
No, I'm saying it's possible he used some other method to temporarily stop the injury from breaking out.
Snape shook his head, dismissing Ivan's theory, and explained further.
A few months ago, Dumbledore told me he might have a way to do that.
Like this.
Yvonne rubbed her chin, lost in thought. If Snape was not lying to him, then Dumbledore must have done something to delay his death, and the overwhelming power he displayed in the duel may have had something to do with it.
You haven't answered my other question, Professor Snape. Did Headmaster Dumbledore give you any special instructions?
He told me that if you won this duel, you'd let me play along with you as best I could, and that the British wizarding community could not afford another wizarding war.
Snape explained. Ivan nodded. This was good news, as Dumbledore's will seem to be in his favor, perhaps even clearing his name.
Aside from that, Dumbledore wanted me to be in charge of teaching Potter occlumency, so that he would not be affected by the Dark Lord's magic again.
Snape said, his expression turning sour.
Harry!
Ivan looked blank for a moment, as if he had just thought of something, but before he could ask, Snape added.
But I'm not interested in teaching him, and I think Potter would probably rather learn from you.
Ivan asked casually, skipping the subject.
That's all.
Snape confirmed, then paused before speaking again.
Dumbledore is dead and he can't help me. I don't have to hide anything from him.
Ivan studied him for a long moment, then said flatly.
I hope it had better be.
Snape replied coldly. Ivan nodded, not wanting to put Snape on the spot any further, and went straight to the point.
In that case, we'll do as you suggested. I'll give you 6 months to find the secret keeper, and you'll need to bring him to me as much as possible. Or you could try to gain Voldemort's trust and become the secret keeper of the place. As for Harry,
Ivan added pointedly. Snape opened his mouth as if to argue, then reluctantly agreed.
Aren't you going to ask me why Dumbledore trusted me?
Snape asked suddenly.
No, you don't have to do that. I have reason to trust you, and I'm sure you'll keep Harry safe.
Ivan patted Snape on the shoulder, then left Snape standing there in a daze. Ivan didn't look away until just before he pushed the door open and left.
By the way, Professor Snape, even though your occlumency was very good, I should warn you that you should not underestimate Harry. If your Dementor is countered and you reveal memories that you should not reveal, you will be in trouble. I'm not so bad that I can't handle a brat.
Snape snapped.
I'm glad you're confident. Just keep an eye out.
Yvonne shrugged. He had just mentioned it casually. The original time-space listener had been too careless in his attempt to teach Harry and underestimated Harry's abilities. Now that he had reminded Snape of this, Snape was unlikely to repeat the mistake.
Well then, I'll see you next term, Professor.
Chapter 839, Voldemort. I have never seen such a shameless person. In the evening, a black figure fell from the sky like a dead leaf at Riddle House. After briefly adjusting his appearance in front of the door, Snape pushed it open and went straight in. Nagini, the serpent in the sleeping room, woke up the moment she heard the sound of the door being pushed open. Snape turned his head to look at her, but quickly turned his attention back to her.
You summon me, Master.
From the head of the living room, Lord Voldemort's body emerged from the shadows, his serpentine red eyes fixed on Snape, his face strangely pale.
I have heard the rumor that Dumbledore is dead.
Voldemort asked bluntly, with no attempt at small talk.
Yes, Master.
Snape said cautiously.
I gave the knot to Dumbledore as you ordered, and then, as you might expect, they had an argument and ended up fighting.
Lord Voldemort interrupted, his voice confident. He was well aware of Dumbledore's strength. In a life-and-death battle, even he might not be a match for Dumbledore. It would be nearly impossible to kill such a powerful wizard head-on. Even if he is defeated in battle, no one can stop Dumbledore from escaping.
Master, I think as you do. Ivan Howells would never have been able to kill Dumbledore, so he could only have used unscrupulous means. Tell me more.
Voldemort's eyes narrowed with sudden interest.
When I examined Dumbledore's body, I was surprised to find signs that it had been corrupted by dark magic.
Snape gave a half-hearted account of his examination of Dumbledore's body. Hearing this, Lord Voldemort's tense expression relaxed considerably. He was also aware of this strange dark magic, one of the many legacies he had acquired from Slytherin's library in his 5th year. There was no known way to break it, and even powerful wizards like them would not be immune to it. Of course, the conditions for the release of such powerful dark magic were also very harsh. Under normal circumstances, it could only be attached to a magical item as a trap. When activated, the other party had to touch the magical item and inject magic into it to activate it. Because of this, he did not use the dark arts against Dumbledore. After all, this white wizard was quite accomplished in the field of alchemy, and Voldemort did not think that he would be able to fool him by tampering with a magical object. It was hard to say how Ivan Harris managed to pull this off. Voldemort's face darkened as he realized that, despite his young age, the damned brat was even more cunning than he was.
Your information is valuable, Severus. The Dark Lord does not mistreat those who are loyal to him. Thank you, Master.
Snape exclaimed.
I'm afraid I can't go back to Hogwarts now.
Voldemort snapped, frowning.
It was Lucius Malfoy who revealed your identity. Yes, Master.
Snape nodded, then continued.
But Ivan Howells didn't trust the traitors very much, so I told him that I was actually working for Dumbledore, passing information about you to the Order of the Phoenix.
Voldemort asked with a sneer.
Ivan Howells thinks he's in control of the wizarding community, and I'm a man who knows what's good for me.
Snape nodded hesitantly, then added eagerly.
Of course, I'm loyal to you, Master. I'm afraid this won't go unnoticed for long.
Voldemort interrupted Snape.
I know Dumbledore, and I don't think he would have told Ivan Howells about you, or you wouldn't be alive today. So you're safe, safer than anyone else. Don't forget, Ivan Howells probably used the information you gave him to kill a major enemy, and he's probably pretty sure by now that you've turned your back on Dumbledore and taken his side.
Voldemort slowly sorted out Snape's current situation.
That is to say, you have earned his trust and are fully capable of continuing with your duties. I'm sure you have the talent, Severus.
Lord Voldemort said, his voice thick with conviction.
This is something that Ivan Howells would never share with you.
There was fear and greed in Snape's eyes, but also hesitation. Voldemort did not mind Snape's hesitation, as there was no longer any chance of him turning back.
Do you have anything to report to me other than Dumbledore's death?
Voldemort continued. Snape hesitated for a long moment, trying to decide if he should tell her, and when Voldemort grew impatient, he replied cautiously.
Ivan Howells seems to be trying to pin the murder of Dumbledore on you, and Minister for Magic Pierce is about to order you wanted all over Britain.
Chapter 840, The Ecstatic Voldemort. Snape didn't get a chance to finish his sentence before a powerful presence loomed over him.
I killed Dumbledore.
Voldemort hissed, his face contorted with anger and fear.
Good.
Voldemort waved his wand in fury, and the table and chairs nearby exploded. Splinters of wood began to fall, and Snape shivered, feeling a pang of regret. Had he been too excited? Fortunately, despite his anger, Voldemort did not take it out on him. After destroying a pile of furniture, he paced around the living room.
McNeese Goyle Crab Lucius.
Voldemort counted the names of the traitors, then directed his hatred at Ivan. If he could, he would have charged into Knockdoff Alley and torn them to pieces. However, he knew that he was no match for Ivan Howells. If he fought him, he would likely suffer the same defeat.
Master,
Snape called out softly when he saw Voldemort deep in thought.
is there anything else, Severus?
Lord Voldemort asked, regaining his composure. He was worried that he would hear bad news from Snape.
This is about Dumbledore. Didn't you ask me to track his recent movements?
Snape asked. Voldemort nodded. Snape had reported to him some time ago that Dumbledore had been on the move since the beginning of the school year, and that Dumbledore had refused to attend the council where the ministry was impeaching him. However, now that Dumbledore was dead, he could not understand why Snape would suddenly bring up the subject again.
Master,
Snape said hesitantly.
the secret of Dumbledore's power.
Voldemort murmured, then looked at Snape and said,
You may speak freely in my presence, Severus, and I will not punish you for it, right or wrong.
With Voldemort's assurance, Snape slowly took out a thick book from the pocket of his robes, placed it in front of Voldemort and explained.
He returned to Hogwarts several times during the 6 months of Dumbledore's disappearance, and whenever he summoned me, I was in the headmaster's office reading this book.
Voldemort looked down at it and frowned. It looked like an ordinary storybook, probably because it had been flipped around so much. The pages were yellowed, but the title was still clearly visible on the cover, The Tales of Beetle the Bard.
A bedtime story.
Voldemort's expression was impatient.
Are you sure Dumbledore is not planning on reading a few stories to calm the Hogwarts children?
If it had not been for Snape, his Avada would have been ready.
Master, please believe me when I say that I found this book in Dumbledore's robes before he was buried, and that Dumbledore always kept it with him.
Snape explained quickly. This piqued Voldemort's interest, as Dumbledore had been so careful to keep something that could not be an ordinary book.
I also stole Dumbledore's wand during his funeral, which I believe may have something to do with a legend in the tales.
Snape said as he took an elder wand from his sleeve and showed it to Voldemort. Voldemort's eyes narrowed at the sight of the wand, as he knew it from his many dealings with Dumbledore.
I didn't think you'd get one of these,
he said appreciatively, reaching out to take the wand. The moment he touched it, Voldemort felt as if his magic was resonating with it, and more importantly, he could feel the unimaginable power contained within. Lord Voldemort couldn't help but experiment with his wand, and an arm-thick beam of light flashed through the air. The next moment, the right wall exploded, and the entire mansion shook slightly. Lord Voldemort's expression was one of utter astonishment at the sight of the crumbling wall. He had not expected the wand to be so destructive in the face of an ordinary smashing charm. Voldemort cast another spell, and again, as if time had been rewound, the debris flew back together, and the wall, which had just been blown up, was restored to its original state in just a second.
Not bad at all. That's what I've been looking for, a wand of the greatest power.
Lord Voldemort's face lit up with excitement as he ran his fingers over the ends of the wand. Ever since he lost control of his Phoenix wand on the night of his resurrection, he had the idea of replacing it. As such, he did not sit around doing nothing. Instead, he searched for many English historical texts and legends and was able to glean a few clues from the few that he could find. However, it seemed that the wand in front of him was very similar to the legendary description.
The Elder Wand.
Voldemort muttered to himself, almost in a frenzy.
I see, no wonder the wand is so powerful.
Chapter 875. 875 No matter what, I want to see you again 2 years ago. Chapter 841 No matter what, I want to see you again.
You've done well this time, very well, Severus.
Voldemort exclaimed as he paced the drawing room with the Tales of Beetle the Bard in his hand. The Elder Wand.
Do you think this story is true? That this wand is the legendary Elder Wand made by Death himself?
Voldemort asked, examining the Elder Wand in his hand.
Master, I can't say for sure.
Snape replied cautiously.
Yes, there is always something to be said for legends.
Voldemort murmured, fully convinced. After all, he had just experienced the power of the Elder Wand, which was definitely beyond the realm of normal magical objects. More importantly, Voldemort desperately wanted this legend to be true, because he saw in it the possibility of defeating Ivan Hals. The crushing defeat at Knockturn Alley had always haunted him. Voldemort still remembers how high-spirited he was when he was first revived, with the entire wizarding world at his fingertips. But in one night, it was as if he had fallen from heaven to hell, and Ivan Hals had shattered all his ambitions with power he could not imagine.
Perhaps it has something to do with Dumbledore's death at the hands of Ivan Hals.
Snape cautioned.
Master, according to the legends I know, there is only one way to change the owner of an Elder Wand, by dueling.
Voldemort instantly understood what Snape meant and his face darkened. As much as he approved of the Elder Wand's choice of owner, didn't this mean that the Elder Wand's current owner was Ivan Hals? Voldemort's expression was as ugly as if he had just swallowed a cockroach. He had hoped that with this wand, he would no longer have to fear the brat, but now it seemed that he would have to think twice. He would never do such a stupid thing as to challenge its owner to a duel with a wand that had already acknowledged its master.
What about the other two Deathly Hallows, Severus? Do you know where they are?
Voldemort turned to Snape and asked urgently. If the Elder Wand was so powerful, what of the other two Deathly Hallows? Voldemort suddenly felt as if he had found a new purpose in life, to gather the three Deathly Hallows and become the master of death, thus defeating Ivan Hals and dominating the wizarding world. However, to his disappointment, Snape shook his head hesitantly, indicating that he had no information about the other Hallows. The fire in Voldemort's heart cooled a little, but he was not too discouraged. Dumbledore's recent eagerness to find the Deathly Hallows meant that he must have known something. The old wand in his hand was also an important clue. Ollivander, a wandmaker who had been around for a long time, might know something about this. Understanding this, a new plan formed in Voldemort's mind.
Severus, you will return to Ivan Hals, keep an eye on him, and find a way into the headmaster's office and Dumbledore's bedroom to search for clues to the Deathly Hallows.
Voldemort instructed.
I understand, Master.
Snape nodded but was not impressed. After discussing the so-called grand plan with Voldemort, he left the Riddle house alone. As he opened the door and stepped out of the room, Snape's nerves began to relax, and his palms and back of his robe were soaked with sweat. Ever since Malfoy and the others defected to Ivan Hals, the Dark Lord's suspicions had grown to the point of morbidity. Even though he had performed every task assigned to him by Voldemort with near-perfect accuracy, Snape could sense that Voldemort was still suspicious of him. Every time he entered or left Riddle House, it was as if he were hovering between life and death.
The Deathly Hallows.
Chapter 842, Hufflepuff's Golden Cup. A week passed in the blink of an eye, and the news of the mysterious man's assassination of Dumbledore spread like wildfire through the wizarding community. A feeling of panic settled over them. The Dark Lord seems unstoppable, and some pessimistic wizards are close to despair that the British wizarding world has lost hope. However, the new acting minister, Pierce, was not discouraged by this, and in a moment of crisis, he showed great courage, announcing on the day of Dumbledore's funeral that Voldemort was wanted by the Ministry of Magic and sending out orders to hunt him down at all costs. Any wizard who provided information about Lord Voldemort received a handsome bonus. However, as many feared, Pierce's strong-arm approach soon drew the Dark Lord's wrath. A week after Dumbledore's funeral, Lord Voldemort himself led a large group of Death Eaters in an attack on Gringotts, which he claimed to be impregnable. Fortunately, the Ministry of Magic's orders arrived in time to prevent the Dark Lord's plot from succeeding, and once again managed to put Voldemort on the spot, capturing a dozen Death Eaters before they could escape. As for the outcome of the battle, Pierce was, of course, very impressed, proclaiming the Ministry's victory over you-know-who. These days, the Daily Prophet is also sending messages to wizards and witches in Britain, trying to show them that the Dark Lord is not invincible if they stick together. Under this bombardment of propaganda, the Ministry's efforts were quickly met with support, and Piers, taking advantage of Gringotts' lack of staff, forced some ministry officials to temporarily replace the vacancies in order to keep Gringotts running. Not only that, but the 20 Aurors Pierce had brought with him were also stationed at Gringotts to take care of the day-to-day security in case the mysteries attacked again. With this combination of skills and the threat posed by Lord Voldemort, the ministry was able to gain more and more power, passing a number of centralized legislation. It can be said that no minister has ever had so much power. Fortunately, Pierce was not blinded by the power he had. The magical mark on his arm constantly reminded him of where he was, so, after settling Gringotts, Pierce immediately rushed to the safe house in Knockoff Alley to meet Ivan. Pierce placed a box on the table in front of him and continued.
Sir Harles, I have what you asked for.
Ivan nodded.
Very good, you were right to be cautious, Pierce. This is a dark magic object made by you-know-who himself, and it is very dangerous.
Ivan gently waved his wand to undo the protective wand placed on the glove compartment, and a simple golden trophy appeared before him. After thousands of years of weathering, this Hufflepuff relic was still beautiful, and the golden cup was carved with all kinds of beautiful magical runes that shone brightly in the midday sun. Ivan didn't reach out to touch it, he just admired it for a while.
Sir Harles, that was.
Pierce began cautiously.
Evidently, Lord Voldemort placed a powerful dark charm on this thing to draw out the worst in a person.
Chapter 843, Shut up, the Dark Lord is not your tool.
You've done well this time, Pierce.
Ivan said appreciatively.
You've helped me get Hufflepuff's belongings in just a week, which is a lot quicker than I thought. I was only acting on your orders, Sir Harles.
Pierce replied humbly, showing no signs of taking credit. It was half flattery and half sincerity. After all, the goblins at Gringotts were the perfect example of those who valued money over their lives. He had spent a lot of time negotiating with Gringotts to cooperate with the ministry in opening Bella's vault and retrieving Hufflepuff's golden cup. To this end, Pierce went so far as to point out to them that Bella's vault contained a highly dangerous magical object that, if mishandled, could have serious consequences. However, the goblins ignored his orders and were very aggressive, claiming that private property was sacrosanct and that they would not open the vault unless Bella herself or her appointed successor came to visit. Otherwise, the property would remain in the Gringotts forever. Pierce could not tolerate such a challenge to the ministry's authority, but the goblins were spread across the globe and surprisingly united. Even as Minister for Magic, he could not force them to compromise. Thus, the two sides were in a deadlock, and it was only after receiving Ivan's instructions a few days ago that Pierce's opinion changed. Just because the ministry couldn't do it didn't mean the Dark Lord couldn't, and understanding this, Pierce went back and immediately staged an attack. As Ivan had pointed out earlier, the goblins behaved themselves after the riot, even going so far as to request that the Ministry of Magic send Aurors to patrol Gringotts, something that would once have been impossible. After taking care of Gringotts so easily, Pierce felt as if he had opened the door to a whole new world, if only he had planned it so that he could use the Death Eaters to get rid of some of his political enemies, or the Dark Lord's deterrent to pass important legislation to strengthen the Ministry of Magic.
Things are bad enough in the wizarding world as it is, Pierce, so you'd better lay low for a while. If you start a mass panic, it could cause some wizards to leave Britain.
Ivan couldn't resist reminding him. One could only use Lord Voldemort as a tool, not three. Ivan did not want to be misinterpreted as a reign of terror by Pierce, as he was forced to do so in order to stabilize the situation in these times. More importantly, it would be awkward if they were caught. After giving Pierce a few pointers, Ivan then asked,
What about Dumbledore's will at Gringotts? Did you get it?
I've brought it.
Pierce said as he took a sealed envelope from the pocket of his wizarding robe and handed it over.
I had someone from the Department of Mysteries examine this letter, and they found that it was enchanted and could only be opened by pouring magic into it.
Ivan nodded and took the envelope from her. He injected some magic into it, and the envelope tore open. An extension charm seemed to have been placed on the inside of the envelope, and inside were 2 letters and something that looked like an elaborate lighter. Ivan was relieved to see that his magic was working. Putting aside his last worry, he took out the lighter and examined it carefully. It turned out to be a deluminator. Dumbledore's will was brief rather than lengthy, as Ivan had expected, and in the first letter, the White Wizard briefly referred to the handling of some of his personal possessions after his death. All of these personal possessions, including the private library and magical instruments, were donated to Hogwarts, with the remainder going to Aberforth. The other three were left for Hermione, Ron, and him.
Odd, Harry wasn't included.
Yvonne frowned, more or less puzzled, but continued to watch patiently. First, the deluminator was left to Hermione Granger. Yvonne reflected that, if he wasn't mistaken, Dumbledore had secretly placed a spell on it to lead Ron back to Harry Potter and Hermione Weasley. Now, however, Dumbledore had left it to Hermione. Yvonne automatically picked up the compact deluminator and checked the system inventory. Magical item, deluminator. Magic low. Description: this is an exquisite magical creation. By pressing a button, it can automatically absorb nearby light sources to replenish its energy. With this, you won't have to turn off the lights at night. Remarks: Albus Dumbledore, the creator of this spell, has attached an interesting little spell to it. Ivan glanced at the item description, then turned to the description in the note. As he expected, Dumbledore had tampered with it, although the exact effects were not noted in the inventory. However, Ivan was not worried at all. He was glad to know that there was a problem. With his current level of alchemy, he would be able to find something after a few days of patient research. With that in mind, Ivan set aside the deluminator and looked at the other folded letter. In Dumbledore's will, the letter was addressed to Ron, and it was also protected by a protective spell that probably only Ron himself could open.
What a pain in the arse.
Chapter 844. There can only be one Dark Lord in the wizarding world. Seeing this, Ivan was momentarily stunned, before realizing that Dumbledore was referring to the Deathly Hallows. It seems then that the disappearance of the Elder Wand was not an accident, but the result of Dumbledore's careful arrangements.
Sir Harles, did Albus Dumbledore say anything in his letter?
Pierce asked curiously, seeing Ivan's expression change as he held the letter.
Take a look for yourself.
Ivan flipped the letter over and handed it over. Intrigued, Pierce took it from her and scanned it, his expression growing more and more surprised. He had assumed that Dumbledore had left behind a will and placed many protective measures in an attempt to expose the evil face of Ivan Halls to the populace, or simply to rally righteous wizards and witches against him. However, this letter did not mention this, and Dumbledore even intended to give the Sword of Gryffindor at Hogwarts to Ivan. This turn of events caught him off guard. Pierce read the letter carefully and then looked up at Ivan. He strongly suspected that Ivan Harris had secretly altered the will while he was distracted. Ivan immediately read Pierce's mind, shook his head, and snapped.
I told you that Voldemort was the one who killed Dumbledore, and I am quite close to the headmaster, which is why he gave me the Sword of Gryffindor. Is that right?
Pierce was confused.
Was I mistaken?
Chapter 845, The So-Called Hero. While his research on Horcruxes was stalled, Ivan made good progress on his search for the Deluminator and was able to decipher Dumbledore's enchantment, which left him speechless. When the Deluminator is fully charged with magic, it can communicate from a distance, as long as you are thinking about the other person. It looks a bit like a love interest gadget. Of course, it could also be used to deliver information. It was of little use to Ivan, as the Deluminator's effects clashed with his magical mark, and he could only keep it as a keepsake for Hermione. The other relic, the Sword of Gryffindor, was retrieved from Hogwarts by the Ministry of Magic, but Ivan did not rush Piers to deliver it. Instead, he handed it back to the Ministry along with the Deluminator and the letter, telling them to deliver it to Hogwarts and announce the will with everyone present.
A portion of Dumbledore's will concerns you, and he left you several relics, to be exact.
Dawlish said as she approached Ivan and the others.
You mean us? Did Headmaster Dumbledore leave something for me as well?
Ron was shocked, having not expected this. Harry and Hermione were also surprised and looked at Dawlish expectantly.
Yes, Mr. Ron, including you, and of course Sir Harles and Miss Granger.
Dawlish replied,
What about Harry?
Hermione asked, sensing that Dawlish had not mentioned Harry.
I'm sorry, but there's nothing in Dumbledore's will for Mr. Harry Potter.
Dawlish shook his head, all business.
That's impossible.
Ron exclaimed, unable to contain himself, as everyone in the wizarding world knew how much Professor Dumbledore cared about Harry. Hermione nodded in agreement. Professor Dumbledore had left something for them that he would never leave alone. Harry looked at Dawlish with a quizzical expression, clearly confused.
No, indeed, the Ministry has confirmed this repeatedly. If you really don't believe me, I can request permission to show you Dumbledore's will.
Dawlish said confidently. Harry's reaction to Dawlish's confirmation was one of disappointment, as he wondered why Professor Dumbledore had not mentioned him in his will.
Perhaps Professor Dumbledore forgot. As you know, the professor is over 100 years old and must have a poor memory.
Ron suggested.
Yes, it must be,
Said Hermione.
Perhaps.
Harry replied casually, knowing full well that Dumbledore would never forget this. He forced a smile and changed the subject.
Captain Dawlish, you haven't said what the professor left for Ron.
Yes.
Dawlish tapped her head and from the pocket of her wizarding robe produced a small, elaborate lighter-like object, which she handed to Hermione.
This is the Deluminator, which Dumbledore said in his will he hoped you would make good use of.
Hermione carefully took it from him, fiddled with it, and soon found a way to use it. She flicked the Deluminator with her right hand, and the candle flames in the Great Hall were instantly sucked into it.
Oh, sorry.
Hermione quickly cast a fire charm, setting the Great Hall's fireplace on fire. The flames rose high, and the light of the fire illuminated everyone again.
It's quite all right. This Deluminator was probably made by Sir Dumbledore himself, and you can't see it anywhere else. It's quite a memento.
Dawlish smiled, then turned to Ron and handed him a letter.
Then there's you, Mr. Weasley, who Dumbledore left a letter for you, enchanted so that no one but you could open it.
Ron quickly took it and opened it without hesitation.
What did the professor say in his letter?
Ivan asked curiously. He knew all about the few relics Dumbledore had left behind, but the contents of the letter were a secret to him. Harry and Hermione both turned to look at Ron for an answer.
Well, the professor said in his letter that he thought long and hard about choosing me as a prefect this year, and that he believed I could do a good job.
Ron said sheepishly.
Of course, you've been wonderful, Ron. You're the best prefect.
Chapter 846, Sword of Gryffindor.
Sir Harles, Headmaster Dumbledore has also left you a gift.
Dawlish handed the letter to Ron, then turned and retrieved an object wrapped in a long cloth from an Auror. Yvonne reached out and took the object from him. After untying the cloth, an ornate sword was revealed. The ruby set into the hilt of the sword shone brightly in the light of the fire, and the name Godric Gryffindor could be seen inscribed on the blade in ancient magical script.
It's...
Hermione exclaimed.
Yes, Headmaster Dumbledore gave it to His Grace in his will.
Sir Harles, Headmaster Dumbledore has also left you a gift. Dawlish handed the letter to Ron, then turned and retrieved an object wrapped in a long cloth from an Auror. Yvonne reached out and took the object from him. After untying the cloth, an ornate sword was revealed. The ruby set into the hilt of the sword shone brightly in the light of the fire, and the name Godric Gryffindor could be seen inscribed on the blade in ancient magical script.
I can't believe Professor Dumbledore gave it to you. I've heard that only the real Gryffindor is entitled to it.
Ron looked at the sword of Gryffindor in Ivan's hand with envy. The headmaster had also left something for him and Hermione, but it was nothing of value, and he was afraid that the sword was the real relic. Hermione tried to correct Ron.
Perhaps Professor Dumbledore gave Ivan the sword because he believed him to be the real Gryffindor.
I didn't say it wasn't.
Ron protested.
I've given you everything you need, so if you have no further questions, I'll be taking my leave. There are many things for the Ministry of Magic to attend to.
Dawlish said politely. Before he left, he glanced at Ivan to make sure he had no special instructions before leading the Aurors out of the foyer.
Why does that Auror seem to respect you?
Hermione asked Ivan suspiciously as she watched Dawlish leave.
Probably because I'm famous.
Ivan explained with a shrug. Hermione was dubious but did not pursue the matter and instead studied the deluminator that Dumbledore had given her, thinking that there must be more to it than meets the eye.
Professor Dumbledore wouldn't leave us something like that for no reason. There might be a way to defeat you-know-who.
Hermione exclaimed. Ron was also motivated to reopen the letter and read it word for word, as if he were trying to find a password or code hidden inside. Ivan shook his head, thinking that Dumbledore would not place his hopes of destroying you-know-who on Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, as he did in the original timeline. It is only the thought of the missing Elder Wand and the spell Dumbledore placed on the Deluminator that makes Ivan uncertain. Ivan then turned his attention to the sword of Gryffindor in his hand, wondering why he had been given it. Did she expect him to be a Gryffindor with all the good qualities? He was not going to fight Voldemort with this sword, was he? He was a wizard, not a berserker. The sword of Gryffindor did not cut through the basilisk as it did in the original dimension, so it was ineffective against Horcruxes. Not to mention, this sword was much more convenient to use. Various thoughts flashed through Ivan's mind, but since he couldn't figure them out, he put them aside for the moment and turned to Harry, who was still in low spirits.
Harry, Professor Dumbledore is very concerned about you. The last time we met, he spoke to me alone about you. What did the professor tell you?
Harry asked quickly.
He's teaching occlumency to you and Snape this term.
Ivan explained.
What?
Harry jumped out of his seat, his eyes round with disbelief and his hope.
You've got to be kidding me, right, Ivan? Of course not.
Ivan went on to explain, looking at Harry, who was visibly shocked.
Professor Snape is the finest occlumency master in Britain. Even I am no match for him. And if you really want to get rid of Lord Voldemort, learning from him is the fastest way. I can learn it myself. I've read the notes you gave me last time. Otherwise, I'd be able to master the spell myself.
Harry cut Ivan off awkwardly.
And Snape wouldn't want to teach me. He hates me so much, he'd give me to Voldemort if he had the chance.
Chapter 847, The Phoenix Reappears. Presumably to prevent Ivan, Hermione, and Ron from looking for him, Harry went in the opposite direction and soon reached the edge of the Quidditch pitch. It was late at night and the stadium was empty. The cold wind calmed him down a little. However, Harry still could not understand why Professor Dumbledore would want him to study occlumency with Snape, knowing how much the potions professor hated him. Not to mention the many things Tisiphone did for Voldemort.
Fox!
Harry exclaimed in surprise. The proud phoenix swooped down from the treetops, circled around him, and flew off toward the forbidden forest.
Do you want me to follow you, Fox?
Harry instinctively took a step forward and asked uncertainly. The phoenix circled low overhead, chirping as if confirming his suspicions. Confirming this, Harry followed without hesitation, despite his many doubts. As the path became more and more remote, Harry felt as if he were entering the depths of the forbidden forest, where he was surrounded by darkness, and the sound of insects was making him increasingly uneasy. Luckily, Fox didn't go any further and soon came to a halt in front of a large banyan tree. Panting, Harry took a few steps closer and saw something silvery gray and liquid-like hanging from the banyan's branches.
This is...
Harry exclaimed, recognizing it at once. He did not have time to wonder why the clothes were there. He immediately drew his wand and shouted.
Split up!
A thin beam of magic flashed through the air, breaking the banyan's branches and causing the cloak of invisibility to fall from its perch. Harry hurried to take the garment, only to find a square card affixed to the cloak's surface, written in a familiar hand. I thought for a long time but couldn't think of anything to leave you, so I had to get your invisibility cloak back. I'm sorry I kept it for a few months and couldn't return it to you the moment I found it.
Is there something else you want to tell me, Fox?
Harry asked curiously, turning to look at the golden-red phoenix. A low peal of fairy music escaped from Fox's mouth, but Harry looked confused. He could not understand the language. The bird must have realized this and decided not to waste any more time on Harry. It burst into flames and engulfed Harry, causing him and the bird to vanish into thin air. When Harry returned to his senses, he was in the boys' dormitory. For some reason, the place seemed empty, with Ivan and the others nowhere to be seen, and Harry looking around for Fox. Ron's voice suddenly came from the other side of the door, and Harry, remembering Dumbledore's instructions on the card, quickly stuffed his invisibility cloak under his bed. The next moment, the door to the dormitory was pushed open and Ivan, Ron, and Neville entered. The trio were surprised to see Harry back in the dormitory, and Ron stepped forward and complained.
"Where have you been, Harry? We were looking for you at Hagrid's, but you weren't there." "I'm sorry, Ron. I just wanted to be left alone for a while."
Chapter 848. Ivan, I really don't know what you little bitches are thinking.
"I understand, Harry. No one would want to learn magic from that old bat. I don't know what Professor Dumbledore was thinking."
Ron patted Harry's shoulder sympathetically. Ivan stepped forward and interrupted their conversation.
"By the way, Harry and Ron, the wizarding world is unstable and Voldemort could attack every one of us at any time, so I've recently developed a spell that allows us to communicate with each other and pass on information. Do you want to give it a try?" "What kind of magic?"
Ron asked eagerly, his interest piqued. Harry was equally curious.
"It's a mark spell."
Ivan explained the effects of the mark. At the beginning of the school year, he wanted to inscribe a magical mark on Harry and the others so that Voldemort would not take it out on them. It was only the fear of misunderstanding, coupled with the fact that Dumbledore would still be alive to protect Harry and the others, that kept them alive.
"Carve a symbol on your arm, like the dark mark."
Ron said automatically when Ivan finished.
"There is no right or wrong with this mark magic. It all depends on how we use it."
Ivan explained patiently. Before he could finish, Ron exclaimed.
"This is great."
Ivan froze, looking at Ron strangely as he realized he didn't really understand what these kids were thinking.
"I always thought we should form a magical organization to fight against you-know-who, like the Order of the Phoenix."
The Order of the Phoenix. What Order of the Phoenix?
Seamus asked, looking around the room in confusion.
"Ah, well."
Ron stammered, remembering the need for secrecy about the Order of the Phoenix. Seamus didn't suspect anything, and his attention was soon turned to this so-called secret society. When he learned that Ivan had developed a special magical mark, he clamored for Ivan to get one for him. Ivan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He hadn't expected things to go so smoothly, and all the excuses he had prepared were useless. However, it was good to have less trouble. After Ivan explained how to use the mark to Harry, Ron, Seamus, and Neville, he pulled out his wand and began to cast a spell. In just a few minutes, the beautiful mark of the sleeping dragon appeared on Harry's wrist.
"Cool."
Seamus exclaimed in excitement as he touched the vivid image of a dragon on his arm. Then, as if he had just thought of something, he asked cautiously.
"What do you think would happen if we used it to cheat?"
Ron and Harry were shocked at Seamus's bold idea, but on second thought, they were surprised to find that it seemed like a plausible solution. If they could communicate without any trouble through their magical imprints, why not use them to deliver answers as well?
I don't think that's such a good idea, Seamus,"
said Neville meekly. However, Seamus didn't want to talk to him at all, and was happily discussing their plan to cheat.
"You'd better get rid of that idea. I've heard that the owls are very strict this year, and the Ministry of Magic will be sending Aurors to supervise them. There might even be magical detection equipment. If you're caught, you'll definitely be expelled."
Ivan said sternly, but he felt helpless. He did not expect Seamus and the others' first reaction, after learning about the magical imprint's ability to transmit information, would be to cheat with it.
"Ivan, aren't you going to revise? There's an OWL exam in just over a month, and you told me earlier that you were going to take this year's final test and try to pass all your subjects so that you can graduate early, didn't you?"
Hermione asked, putting down her book.
"I've already reviewed it before. Besides, it's just an ordinary exam, even if I confess."
Ivan almost let it slip and hurriedly put down his diadem to salvage the situation.
I mean, I can pass even with my eyes closed."
Chapter 849. I don't know how to teach defense against the dark arts. Hermione was left speechless by Ivan's words, but was unable to refute them. Professor McGonagall had once said that with Ivan's magical abilities, he could have graduated from Hogwarts a long time ago, and the OWL exam might not have been too difficult for him. However, this also meant that Yvonne would have to leave Hogwarts the following year, and Hermione was frustrated by this, as she was not confident that she would be able to pass the NEWT exam with flying colors. Ivan saw this and tried to comfort her.
Just because I'm not a student doesn't mean I won't be at Hogwarts.
Are you going to come back and teach after you graduate?
Hermione asked, immediately guessing Ivan's thoughts, and then thinking of the vacancy she was in.
Defense against the dark arts.
No, I can't possibly teach this class.
Ivan interrupted, startled. He had not lived long enough. Ivan had witnessed the horrors of the Lord Voldemort's curse over the past 5 years, and the only person who had ever been a defense against the dark arts professor was Lupin. However, even Lupin was unable to attend a year's worth of classes and left his job for some reason at the end of the year. Although Ivan was very strong, he would not joke about his personal safety. Hermione stuck her tongue out, apparently thinking of the dark arts defense against the dark arts curse from Ivan's shocked reaction. However, it seemed that there were no other courses to choose from other than this one, as there was still a vacancy for a professor.
I've heard that the Ministry of Magic is planning to increase your ability to take risks at this particular time next year, so a new course will be added to train you in combat skills.
Ivan said, half joking.
Train us like dueling lessons?
Harry and Ron asked enthusiastically. Normally, they would sigh and complain when they heard that the ministry would be adding a new class to the curriculum for the coming year, but it would be a lot more fun if they were taught to pick up their wands and fight.
Something like that.
Ivan smacked his lips. The truth was, he hadn't figured out how he was going to teach the class.
But will the ministry agree to have you as a professor?
Hermione asked hesitantly. Ivan would only be 16 next year, not even an adult, and it was unlikely that the ministry would accept an underage wizard as a professor.
Don't be so pedantic with the ministry. Believe me, the new acting minister, Piers, is a very open-minded man.
Yvonne promised. Although he had not had a chance to discuss the matter with Pierce, he was confident that the ministry would not refuse. Hogwarts, on the other hand, did not require much consideration, as the position of headmaster was still vacant, and the 12 school governors who could influence decisions were all on their own. The only thing to consider is the opinions of the parents. Ivan, however, had a plan to deal with this, which was to have the Daily Prophet spread the word about his genius. It would be best if everyone knew that he had graduated above his rank and he could show off his previous achievements. With this talent, there was less opposition when he was specially hired by the ministry to teach a new subject that was not yet an exam. In fact, Ivan even considered becoming the new headmaster of Hogwarts if he could, as there were some system tasks that could be easily accomplished with the help of the headmaster's position. However, after careful consideration, Ivan decided against it. At the age of 16, headmasters of Hogwarts were considered too much, and Ivan had no experience in running a school, so he had to start as a professor and work his way up through the ranks. One had to take things one step at a time in order to change the educational landscape at Hogwarts. Harry, Ron, and Hermione were dubious, believing that the ministry would most likely not approve of Ivan as a professor. Ivan shrugged, then turned to Harry and asked,
Have you decided if you want to learn occlumency from Professor Snape, Harry? We'll talk about it later.
Harry replied, his head aching. He had been too busy revising every day lately, and he didn't want to have to deal with Snape's big face while he was studying, which would drive him insane.
You should be more careful about this, Harry. Don't you remember? You know who used to send lots of false information to Professor Dumbledore through your dreams in the first year of school. Maybe you know who is going through your memories right now.
Hermione solemnly told Harry about the need to learn occlumency from Snape. Unable to bear Hermione's constant chatter, she eventually agreed to ask Snape if he would like to teach her on Friday. Harry was optimistic that Snape would not hesitate to refuse his offer.
What's this, a crown? It's Ravenclaw's diadem, which you know who made into a powerful dark magical object. It's what caused Lockhart's attack on the students 3 years ago.
Ivan explained briefly how he had acquired the diadem. Ron's skin crawled at the mention of the you-know-who, but when he learned that Ivan had repaired the damaged diadem, his interest was piqued. He had heard rumors about the Ravenclaw corona, which was said to give wisdom.
Can I try it on?
Ron asked.
Of course.
Chapter 850, The Crown That Increases Wisdom. Perhaps Helena Ravenclaw would know something.
Good evening, Lady Helena.
The wandering ghost reluctantly stopped, turned her head, gave Ivan a look of disgust, and said casually,
Good evening, Hales. It's been almost a year since we last met. I can't believe you're still looking for me.
Yvonne rubbed her nose. Why did this feel like a double cross? Fortunately, Ivan was able to discern the reason for Helena's cold attitude from her words, and he immediately looked apologetic.
I'm sorry, Madam Helena, but too much has happened at Hogwarts recently, and it takes a lot out of me.
Ivan said as he pulled out a white-hand gold diadem with ornate sapphires. Helena's eyes were instantly drawn to it. She floated slowly to Ivan and stared at the diadem in his hand, her eyes full of nostalgia and sadness. Finally, she gently reached out as if to lift the diadem, but unfortunately her arm passed through it. It was only then that Helena remembered that she was a ghost and could not touch things in reality. Helena gave a low sigh, but she was sharp enough to notice that the diadem was not as damaged as Ivan had claimed.
You fixed it.
Helena asked, looking surprised.
Yes, that's why it took so long to find you.
Ivan nodded, then told Helena that he had tried and failed to repair the diadem, and that he had found a way to fix it in Ravenclaw's lab.
I accidentally broke it 3 years ago, so I've been trying to fix the diadem before returning it to you, but I didn't expect it to take so long.
Ivan added with a shrug.
I see, I didn't know.
Helena said, looking embarrassed.
Think I'm like Tom Riddle.
Yvonne asked with a smile.
It seems that I have misunderstood you.
Helena's cold face flushed slightly. When she learned that Ivan had been trying to fix her mother's diadem for nearly a year, fulfilling her wishes, Helena's anger and resentment dissipated. She did not doubt Ivan's words, as she had asked Ravenclaw students about the events of the past 3 years in the course of the year. In addition, Ivan had previously consulted her on alchemy, so Helena was well aware that this young wizard in front of her had extraordinary skills in alchemy, and it was not impossible for him to fix her mother's diadem.
Anyway, thank you for fulfilling my wish, Harles.
Helena said gratefully.
If I promised to bring it to you, I'd have to do it. Besides, you've helped me before by telling me a lot of secrets about this castle, haven't you?
Ivan replied, raising his eyebrows. Helena gave a small smile, her fleeting figure beautiful in the moonlight.
You should smile more often. You look better than your usual cold self.
Ivan said teasingly. Helena was stunned for a moment and her smile faded a little. She said in a slightly annoyed tone.
You can say that to the little girls who are still alive.
Ivan gave a noncommittal shrug, and seeing that Helena was in a good mood, he got down to business.
By the way, Helena, I heard that your mother's golden crown increases people's wisdom. Is that true?
Of course it is. I stole it to be smarter than my mother.
Helena sighed.
And did you succeed?
Yvonne asked curiously, not bothering to press him on how to use the Ravenclaw crown. To be honest, he found it hard to imagine that a magical object could make a person incredibly clever.
I succeeded, but perhaps I also failed.
Helena floated to the bust of Ravenclaw and gazed at it for a long time before speaking.
You have been to the lab in the room of requirement, haven't you?
Yvonne nodded, but could not understand why the ghost lady had brought it up. Helena ignored Ivan's confusion and continued talking.
My mother, Rowena, was a very clever witch, no.
Helena quietly recounted the events of the past. As the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, she was always looked forward to. Unfortunately, compared to her talented mother, her talent was only at the level of an ordinary genius. No matter how hard she tried, she could not compare to her mother. Perhaps because she was disappointed with her performance when she became a little more sensible, Rowena devoted most of her time to the study of magic and spent less and less time with her. This infuriated the young Helena, and she was envious of her mother's incomparable intellect, which allowed her to receive praise wherever she went.
At the time, I stubbornly believed that if I could become smarter and more famous than my mother, she would probably want to see more of me.
Helena whispered.
So you stole the diadem?
Ivan asked. Helena nodded slightly, then turned to look at the golden crown in Ivan's hand and said emotionally,
When I put on this diadem, I knew I was wrong, very wrong, but I didn't want to give in to my mother. I wanted to prove to her that she could do it, and I could do it.
Chapter 851, Magic that Increases Wisdom.
Then my mother became ill, very ill. She was desperate to see me again, even though I had been unfaithful, so she sent Barrow to find me and…
Helena's eyes showed pain and regret, and she could not continue, but Ivan knew what would happen next. Unable to bring back Helena, who was a rebellious girl at the time, and jealous of her freedom, the bloody Baron stabbed her to death. Realizing his mistake, Barrow killed himself in frustration. In a sense, it was her own fault that Helena ended up like this, and caused Ravenclaw founder Rowena to die of depression.
Actually, Madame Rowena has always regretted being so focused on her research and neglecting your feelings.
Ivan assured her after a moment's hesitation. The pained expression on Helena's face suddenly softened, and she turned slightly to look at Ivan in confusion.
I went to the lab and saw a stone tablet at the door that said…
Ivan began to explain, but Helena spoke up for him before he could finish.
Superhuman intelligence is the greatest treasure of mankind. That's what my mother always used to say. She was always fond of clever people. It's a pity that I've been such a disappointment to her.
Helena's voice dripped with resentment.
Do you really think so? The stone tablet was destroyed when I went to the lab, presumably by Madame Rowena.
Ivan said calmly. Helena was taken aback. Ivan's speech continued, his eyes fixed on Helena as he enunciated each word.
I think your departure made her realize she once had something more important than wisdom.
Helena's body shook violently and her eyes filled with tears. She gently covered her mouth with her hand as if to stop the sobs from escaping. Drops of tears rolled down her cheeks, but before they could fall to the ground, they dissipated into specks of fluorescent light. Ivan tactfully turned away, pretending to look out of the window, allowing Helena to vent her pent-up emotions. After what seemed like an eternity, the muffled cries died down. Helena wiped the tears from her eyes and muttered to herself.
If only we had all figured this out earlier, maybe.
You never know what's important until you lose it.
Ivan said. Helena sighed and nodded, then took a deep look at the diadem and said reluctantly,
Take it with you.
You're not going to keep it.
Ivan asked, surprised. He could see that Helena was obsessed with the diadem and was prepared to return it to its rightful owner when he offered it to her.
No, it's pointless for me to hold it.
Helena said with a wry smile. She was now a ghost, unable to lift a diadem. Ivan didn't argue any further, afraid that Helena would change her mind if he declined.
So what should I do with it? Just put it on?
Ivan asked, fidgeting with the ornate diadem. He had tried all kinds of things but had received no feedback.
You're missing an incantation to activate it.
Helena laughed and floated over to Ivan, placing her palm gently on top of the diadem and murmuring something. Ivan clearly saw the famous quote engraved on the inner side of the diadem light up, and then the whole diadem glowed pale blue. It lasted only an instant before it disappeared, but Ivan could feel that the diadem in his hand was different from before. He had even guessed that the incantation to activate the diadem was the phrase,
A man's greatest treasure is his superior intellect.
although he had to use an ancient English phrase from 1,000 years ago. Fortunately, from another perspective, since he had not discovered this, the young Lord Voldemort probably did not have the ability to do so. Otherwise, he would not have recklessly used the diadem as a high-level material for creating a Horcrux.
Now you can try it on.
Helena said encouragingly, withdrawing her hand. After receiving Helena's confirmation, Ivan eagerly placed the diadem on his head. He was curious if it was as magical as the rumors claimed. However, the moment he put on the diadem, Ivan's face froze in shock and disbelief. Helena was surprised by Ivan's reaction but didn't think too much of it. She asked him with a smile.
So are you surprised? Do you feel smarter?
Yes, very surprised.
Ivan murmured, regaining his composure. He gently removed the diadem and gazed at it, his eyes thoughtful. Ravenclaw's diadem did indeed augment his intellect, though Ivan found the surge in speed of thought and comprehension incredibly familiar. This was very similar to the increase he received when he opened the Academic Genius Experience card, but the effect was not as obvious. This discovery greatly surprised Ivan. Could it be that every time he used the experience card, the system somehow enhanced his mental capacity?
Like this diadem.
What about the so-called protective mode? Could it also be some kind of magical effect? Various thoughts flashed through Ivan's mind, and he felt that he was very close to the truth, although he was not certain of his suspicions.
Hars.
When Helena saw Ivan standing there holding the diadem as if possessed, she waved her hand in front of his eyes.
No, nothing, I'm just a little surprised.
Ivan said, clutching the diadem in his hand.
No wonder Lady Ravenclaw was called the wisest person in the wizarding world.
Chapter 852, Knowledge is the Fundamental Power of Wizards. At exactly 3 o'clock in the morning, after making an appointment for the next meeting, Ivan said goodbye to Madame Ghost and returned to the boys' dormitory alone with Ravenclaw's diadem. Throughout the journey, Ivan's mind was filled with the possibility and even the need to tentatively call out to the system for answers. However, the system ignored him, let alone answer his doubts. In the end, Ivan had no choice but to give up and put those wild guesses behind him for now. After all, he had many more pressing matters to deal with at the moment, and could not spare much effort to seek that answer. One of the most important tasks was naturally to find a way to get rid of Voldemort. Otherwise, such a powerful dark wizard would be hiding in the shadows all day, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The safety of Isaiah and the others was also a concern, as they were all marked with magic and could be reached at a moment's notice if they were in danger. If the Dark Lord were to launch a shameless sneak attack, Alicia and the others would not even have time to send a signal.
We'd better hurry. Snape's classroom is covering the defense against the dark arts class this morning.
Seamus shouted at them as he hurriedly put on his uniform. No one wanted to be late for Snape's class. Ivan slowly got up from his bed, gently waved his wand, and the robe hanging on the hanger immediately floated over. The blanket and pillow behind him automatically folded and placed neatly on the bed. The convenience and quickness of magic were evident, and if it had not been for her habit of using it, Ivan would have used a cleaning charm instead of washing up. Harry, Seamus, and Neville watched in envy as Yvonne handled the trivial tasks with the use of her wand, something they could not do with their level of magic.
Why are you all staring at me? You won't make it in time if you don't leave now.
Ivan reminded them, and then, after a moment's thought, took the Ravenclaw corona from his drawer. The few of them left in a hurry. After breakfast, they ran towards the potions classroom and sat down before the bell rang. Umbridge's position as Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts had been vacant since she was forcibly removed by orders from the Ministry for colluding with you-know-who. Unable to find a replacement, the Ministry was temporarily left in charge of each subject. Unfortunately, Snape was in charge of teaching the 5th year, and Harry and the others complained about it for days. For Ivan, however, it didn't matter who attended the class, and Snape was better off, as he knew better than to pretend that he didn't notice if Ivan missed a class. With this in mind, Ivan took a seat in a corner, put on his Ravenclaw diadem, and opened a book he had taken from the restricted section. As Ivan expected, Snape did not even glance in his direction during the morning's defense against the dark arts lesson, as if he were not in the classroom. However, Ivan's blatant attempt at distraction attracted the attention of several Slytherin students, who kept turning their heads to look at the corner and even snitched on Snape.
Hales took care of a Norwegian ridgeback on his own last year. Are you going to give it a try?
Snape looked coldly at the Slytherin students, as if he would actually get a dragon to teach them if they so much as nodded. When they heard this, they shrank back and quickly shut their mouths. Snape must have known that he was letting Ivan get away with something, because he explained after a pause.
Hales is planning to apply for graduation this year, so I've allowed him to read some of the exam prep books in my class.
Chapter 853, Occlumency. At Snape's explanation, the young wizards turned away sulkily. Undeterred, Ivan spent the morning reading 2 abstruse books on the dark arts. However, in terms of efficiency, the Ravenclaw Corona's improvement was much worse than the system's academic genius experience card, which only had 1/3 of the desired effect. The good thing was that it could be used all the time, and one did not have to go through the trouble of earning achievement points. Ivan was very satisfied with the improvement in his thinking. As the bell rang, Harry and Ron, who had survived 2 periods of defense against the dark arts, breathed a sigh of relief.
By the way, Harry, weren't you looking for Professor Snape to teach occlumency?
Ivan asked Harry as he put away the 2 books on the table and removed his Ravenclaw crown.
I don't think it's too late to bring it up next week in potions.
Harry said hesitantly, trying to back out of the conversation.
That will not do. The sooner the better.
Hermione cut Harry off sternly, urging him to find Professor Snape. Harry looked on helplessly as Snape left, and after a moment's hesitation, he gritted his teeth and ran after him.
Please wait, Professor Snape.
Harry stammered as he hurried forward. Snape stopped in his tracks when he heard a shout behind him. He turned his head away, frowning impatiently, and Harry shivered at the sight of his empty eyes.
I heard from Ivan that you're the best occlumency master in Britain.
Harry said, gathering his courage. He waited nervously for Snape's response, unsure of himself. He knew how much Snape hated him, and if Professor Dumbledore had been alive, Snape might have followed his orders and taught him, but not so much now.
Come to my office at 6 o'clock tonight.
Harry was visibly taken aback and stared at Snape in astonishment, wondering if he had misheard.
I don't want to repeat myself.
Snape snapped, then paused before continuing.
Remember, don't tell anyone about this, and if anyone asks, just say that I'm planning on detaining you for a few days, understand? I'm sure no one will question that.
Snape did not wait for Harry's response before heading off towards the entrance hall. It took Harry a while to regain his composure, as he had not expected Snape to agree so readily. He returned to the classroom in a daze, and Ron and Hermione were the first to approach him.
Well, Harry, did Professor Snape say yes?
Hermione asked.
He asked me to come to his office at 6 o'clock tonight.
Harry said, ignoring Snape's instructions and not thinking he could hide it from Ivan and the others. Not to mention, he was counting on Ivan, Ron, and Hermione to come to his rescue if Snape tried to harm him.
Come in.
Harry took a deep breath, gently pushed the door open and entered. There was no light in the room, only the faint glow of a fire burning on the walls. Harry turned his head and looked around. There were hundreds of glass bottles on shelves on either side of the room. Sticky specimens of plants and animals floated among the colorful potions, and there was a strong smell of potion. Uncomfortable, Harry sniffed, then quickly turned his attention to the bell behind his desk, which seemed to be out of order, as it was pointing to exactly 11 o'clock.
Looks like you're not late today, Potter.
Snape's cold voice rang out in the office, startling Harry and causing him to turn his head in panic.
How much do you know about occlumency?
Snape asked bluntly, not wishing to engage in small talk.
It protects the memories in my head, preventing you-know-who from using magic to probe my mind.
Harry tried to recall the notes he had read during the summer holidays before continuing.
Highly advanced occlumency also creates false memories, confusing legilimers who wish to peer into them. Very well, since you know a thing or two about it, let's skip the beginner's lesson and go straight to actual combat.
Snape said, his eyes twinkling at Harry.
But I'm supposed to.
Harry asked nervously. The notes Ivan had given him contained some elaboration, but he had only theoretical knowledge and no practical experience.
Your will to resist my charms.
Snape said casually. Harry stared at him in annoyance. What difference did it make if he didn't say anything? He even speculated that Snape had agreed to this morning so that he could humiliate him in the process of learning occlumency.
We'll start now. The Dark Lord won't give you much time to prepare.
Snape said slowly, ignoring Harry's angry glare. Harry immediately snapped out of it and concentrated on the various methods of resisting legilimency in his notes. Try to think of useless things to interfere with the caster's ability to obtain information. Use one's will to channel one's own magic to resist an intruder, and create false memories in one's mind to confuse the enemy. Without warning Harry, Snape waved his wand and shouted.
Telekinesis.
Chapter 854, Frequent Lessons. As the world spun, images flashed through Harry's mind like a movie. At the age of 5, he watched Dudley riding his new red bicycle, and his heart was filled with envy.
Excellarmus, excluding your weapon.
A scarlet beam flashed through the air. The next moment, Harry found himself back in Snape's office, and a long, black object was flying towards him. Harry instinctively took it from her and looked down to see that it was a wand.
Hand it over.
Snape's fierce voice boomed out of the darkness ahead. Harry looked up to see Snape looming over him in the dark, but he was clearly injured by his own disarming charm.
You must think you're very capable, don't you, Potter?
Snape demanded, striding forward and snatching his wand away.
I didn't.
Harry retorted angrily.
You were the one who said there were other ways I could resist your charms.
Snape hissed.
You didn't let me put the spell on you, did you? I resisted it.
Harry said stiffly, glaring at Snape.
Rubbish, you can't cope with anyone with your poor spellcasting skills.
Snape roared. He looked as if he was about to say something else but stopped himself and instead questioned her darkly.
I saw Fawkes in your memory earlier. Where was he going to take you? Was it Dumbledore's instructions?
No Fawkes, no nothing. That was a deliberate attempt to construct memories in my head to lure you into a trap.
Harry forced his face to remain expressionless as he spoke dryly, trying to avoid Snape's gaze.
Don't try to lie to me. I know more about occlumency than you do.
Snape said coldly.
Dumbledore left you something, didn't he? Or did he have other plans? I should have known he would never have left yours out.
Harry gripped his wand and said nothing.
It doesn't matter if you don't tell me. I can see for myself.
Snape said, a nasty smile on his face.
And tell it to Voldemort, right?
Harry demanded loudly. Snape's face froze. Harry looked angrily at Snape and continued.
I saw it all. Last summer, you were the one who treated Voldemort's injuries and worked with him on how to save the Azkaban prisoners.
Snape's eyes flickered and his tone was scornful.
I assume Dumbledore warned you not to try that again, and it seems you didn't listen.
It's not like I can control the dreams. Harry was frustrated, but he did not want to show weakness in front of Snape, so he said in a confrontational tone.
If I didn't get into Voldemort's head, I wouldn't be able to see you acting so subservient to him. Apparently, all you see is what the Dark Lord wants you to see.
Snape interrupted.
You have no ability to tell right from wrong, Potter. You don't even know what's real and what's not.
Snape said sarcastically. Trembling with rage, Harry gripped his wand tightly, wishing he could hit Snape again, but his remaining sense told him that Snape was deliberately trying to provoke him, and that he would have a reason to lecture Harry if Harry attacked first. His forbearance did not work, however, and Snape went from bad to worse, reaching out and snapping.
Give it to me. What?
Harry was too angry to care about Snape.
In case you lose control, I don't think you'll have to use your wand for the rest of the lesson.
Snape explained slowly.
That doesn't make sense. How am I supposed to defend myself against your magic if I don't have a wand?
Harry backed away, glaring at Snape.
Of course, use your head.
Snape said harshly.
If you really don't want me to see memories, then find a way to empty your mind or use your will to banish me.
Harry stood rooted to the spot for a long time, hesitating, until Snape grew impatient and seemed about to attack him. He knew he had no chance of defeating Snape if Snape was on guard.
Ivan, Ron, and Hermione know I'm practicing magic in your office tonight.
Chapter 855, Snape's Movement. Snape could not care less about Harry's threats, which he found amusing, but he was also extremely unhappy that Harry had gone against his orders and unilaterally divulged that he was going to study occlumency tonight.
Good, it seems you have no intention of remembering anyone's warnings until you've been taught a lesson.
Snape threatened.
That depends on who gets the orders.
Harry replied, glaring at Snape.
Keep being stubborn then.
Snape sneered.
I think you might have forgot that anger can make your brain's defenses go haywire.
Snape did not wait for Harry to get ready, but waved his wand again and shouted.
Telekinesis.
Harry was visibly dazed for a moment, and then he felt his head swim as memories that he had tried so hard not to see resurfaced. Harry gritted his teeth and tried to stop it, but his wand was no longer in his hand, so he had to do his best to recall the memories that didn't matter and try to hide the more important secrets. The stalemate lasted for what seemed like an eternity, and just as Harry was beginning to feel he could not hold on any longer and the secret of the cloak of invisibility was about to be revealed, the feeling of his brain being invaded vanished. Harry sank to the ground, breathing hard, his forehead beaded with sweat, but before he could breathe a sigh of relief, Snape's voice rang in his ear like a demon.
Take 5 minutes, then continue.
5 minutes, Harry shuddered. He tried to stand up and argue with Snape, but he didn't have the strength to speak.
That's all for today's practice. You can go now.
Harry was so happy to hear this that his dazed mind was shaken, and his body seemed to regain its strength.
When you get back, keep practicing how to empty your mind, and don't expect me to go easy on you tomorrow.
Snape added. Harry opened his mouth, wanting to ask Snape for a few more days, something he would not want to experience for a month. Due to his pride, Harry did not say a word until he reached the door.
My wand, Professor.
Harry said hesitantly to Snape.
As punishment for provoking the professor, I am prepared to confiscate your wand for 2 days.
Snape began casually, and then continued before Harry could retort.
I don't think you'll need it on your day off, or if you behave more humanely tomorrow, I might consider returning it to you.
Harry scowled at Snape with fire in his eyes, but he was too weak to shout abuse after being tortured for over an hour, so he slammed the door and left. The fire in the fireplace flickered, and Snape was left alone in his dark office for a long time in deep thought before he waved his wand to lock the door and placed his hand on the broken bell.
What? He confiscated your wand? How dare Snape?
Ron was furious when Harry told him what he had been through in the office.
Let's go find Professor Dumbledore.
Hermione threw down her knife and fork angrily and tried to get up. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Hermione was reminded that Professor Dumbledore had died more than 2 months ago, and no one in the school could control Snape now. Harry and Ron's spirits were low. Ivan stayed out of the group's discussion, although he had a feeling something was up.
Harry, did you say you disarmed Snape's wand in the potions office last night?
Yvonne asked. Harry nodded, fearful that Snape would find out about the invisibility cloak and attack him without thinking. It was probably because the other party was so focused on searching his memories that he was able to hit his target without any resistance.
That shouldn't be.
Ivan frowned, thinking to himself that he had warned Snape to be careful when teaching Harry in case of an accident like in the real world. It was difficult for Ivan to determine whether this was an accident caused by Snape's underestimation of Harry's power, or whether it was an accident and not a coincidence. Ivan had the sudden urge to grab Snape and question him. However, he knew very well that Snape would most likely tell him if he asked, but the answer would be incomplete, even misleading.
Don't worry too much, Harry. Maybe it's not as bad as you think.
Chapter 856, Nurmengard. Hermione and Ron were puzzled as to why Ivan trusted Snape so much. Harry wanted to say something, but hesitated. He suspected that Snape had another important reason, and that was that Snape had been eager to find out what the headmaster had left him while teaching him occlumency. However, thinking about the will in which Professor Dumbledore told him to trust Snape if he had to, Harry swallowed the words he was about to say, as he could not be certain whether Snape was working for Lord Voldemort or spying on him.
Winky, did you need something?
Mr. Harles, Winky.
Winky, a small house elf, stammered as she looked at Ivan in fear.
Stop, we'll talk about it later.
Ivan raised his hand to stop Winky from continuing. He looked around and saw that there were no students staying near the restricted section, but Ivan was still worried. He led Winky out of the library and into an empty classroom. Ivan had been trying to find a way to complete his mission with the house elf army for over a month, and he had made Winky go offline to collect information on the house elves. Especially figuring out what they were thinking and who they were working for, whether it was the headmaster of Hogwarts or the school itself. Dobby could not be allowed to do such work, as he would only make a mess of things or argue with the Hogwarts elves over ideas. Thus, Ivan had to choose another spy, and being new to Hogwarts and in a state of confusion, Winky was the best choice. Winky, in particular, did not require elvish rights, nor did she want a salary, but rather wanted to work for the rest of her life as a house elf. It was an easy request to fulfill, and the rest of the story followed. It only took him an hour to convince Winky to work for him.
You can talk now.
Ivan said. Winky did not hesitate to tell him what she had heard from the other house elves.
You're saying that one of the elves knew where Headmaster Dumbledore went some time ago.
Ivan asked in amazement. Winky nodded and replied cautiously.
They say that Sir Dumbledore spent a great deal of time in the Tower of Nurmengard.
Yvonne murmured to herself, thinking that the place was familiar. She searched her memory and found it to be a prison where Dumbledore had imprisoned the dark wizard Grindelwald after his defeat in a duel in 1945. Dumbledore apparently went there to see Grindelwald, presumably to get rid of the dark arts on his right arm. As one of the most powerful dark wizards in the world, Grindelwald was no less accomplished in the dark arts than Lord Voldemort, and he was also the one most likely to break it.
Mr. Dumbledore has asked us to deliver meals to Mr. Grindelwald regularly.
Winky said shrilly, wincing. Although it had only been at Hogwarts for a short period of time and was unable to take on the task, from what it had been told by the other house elves, it did not seem like a good job. Ivan nodded at Winky's words. The prison had been built by Grindelwald at the height of his power to house some of his opponents. It had been abandoned for a long time, and Grindelwald was presumably the only prisoner inside. Dumbledore could not very well hire someone to look after this felon, so the only option was to have the house elves of Hogwarts look after him. Ivan was suddenly overcome with emotion. Dumbledore's death had been shrouded in layers of mystery, many of which he could not solve. Finally, there is a new way, and Dumbledore visited Nurmengard during the time he was playing Vanishing, and stayed there for a long time. Grindelwald was the original owner of the Elder Wand and had a strong connection to Dumbledore, where Ivan believed many of his doubts could be answered.
Winky, go to the kitchen later and ask who's the elf in charge of Grindelwald's meals today, and find a way to take over.
Yvonne said.
But Sir Winky...
Winky said sadly, clutching her dirty clothes.
No, there's no need to trouble you. I'll see to it myself.
Chapter 857, Gellert Grindelwald. Around noon, after learning the location of Nurmengard from several house elves, Ivan took his meal and disappeared into Hogwarts. When he returned to his senses, he was in a deserted area. The almost crossing of half of Europe was a bit hard for Ivan to adjust to, but he soon adjusted and looked straight ahead. A dark, fortress-like edifice stood halfway up the hill, the most prominent of which was the tall tower in the center.
Ivan Hells.
You knew about me, and you knew I would come to you.
Yvonne stopped a meter from the bed, unable to hide her surprise.
He thought you would find your way here, sooner or later.
Grindelwald explained slowly.
It seems Headmaster Dumbledore has a lot of faith in me.
Ivan said teasingly, raising his eyebrows. Dumbledore had not left him any clues or hints before he died, and Ivan would not have remembered this ruined prison if he had not heard from Winky.
Albus told me quite a bit about you.
Grindelwald began, then coughed heavily and covered his mouth with his hand for a few moments before recovering enough to continue.
He thought you were the most likely person to change the wizarding world in centuries.
Ivan rubbed his nose. Dumbledore had mentioned this to him before, and he was curious as to how Grindelwald would take this.
So what do you think?
Ivan asked.
I didn't believe it at first, but it seems there is some basis for it.
Grindelwald stared at Ivan appraisingly.
No wizard has ever reached such heights at your age.
Undeterred by Grindelwald's praise, Yvonne replied casually.
Really? I've heard about you from Professor Dumbledore.
As he spoke, Ivan placed the meal in his left hand in front of Grindelwald. He had not forgotten that he was here to deliver food. Grindelwald did not hold back. He picked up his knife and fork and slowly cut a piece of steak, putting it into his mouth with the grace of a nobleman. Ivan, however, noticed that the man's left hand, which was hidden in the shadows and holding a knife, was acting out of its own accord, and that the steak he had cut from it looked crooked rather than neat. Before he could take a closer look, Grindelwald said,
If you have any doubts, you can speak now.
Ivan waved his wand to get a stool from a distance and sat down on the edge of the bed. He did not wait for Grindelwald to finish eating, but instead asked,
What did Headmaster Dumbledore say to you?
Grindelwald did not stop slicing his steak.
Part of it is about you, the rest you do not have to know.
Yvonne's eyes narrowed, but she didn't seem to care that he was hiding something from her, as she knew Grindelwald and Dumbledore were very close, and there were things she didn't want to hear. Grindelwald openly stated that he was prepared to hide something, which was better than keeping it to himself. With this in mind, Ivan left out the inconvenient parts and patiently tried to find out from Grindelwald why Dumbledore was there. To Ivan's disappointment, Grindelwald revealed little useful information during the course of the meal, most of which was about Dumbledore's opinion of him and the things he had done. Ivan couldn't understand why the headmaster would mention him in such detail to Grindelwald, and was in no mood to continue listening, so he interrupted.
When Dumbledore's headmaster came to see you, did you know he was under the influence of the dark arts and was dying?
Chapter 858, part of the agreement.
Of course, I'm aware of that.
Grindelwald said slowly, his face calm.
So you must have done some research on how to counteract the dark arts' corrosive effects on the body, correct?
Ivan asked, staring at Grindelwald.
Yes, I did give him some advice, but he was too late. The strange dark magic had taken over his body.
Grindelwald replied.
But the potion maker told me that Dumbledore would only be able to hold out until the beginning of the school year in his condition, and yet he defied all common sense and managed to hold out until the end of the year, even managing to retain his fighting prowess. I'm sure you had something to do with that.
Ivan said confidently.
You are very sharp.
Grindelwald's deep voice was husky, and he did not answer Ivan's question directly. Instead, he held out his left hand, which was hidden in the shadows.
This is the answer you seek.
Ivan looked down at it and his pupils contracted. Grindelwald's entire left hand was charred black, and there was a faint black aura around it, making it look exactly like Dumbledore's injuries.
In other words, you've been taking some of the damage from the dark arts in Dumbledore's place these past few days.
After a brief period of surprise, Ivan quickly came to this conclusion, having seen several spells at Hogwarts that had similar effects during his visit to the Forbidden Book. Grindelwald's expression didn't change as he withdrew his hand and said casually.
You can assume that.
Ivan looked hard at Grindelwald and then asked.
You don't seem to mind answering my question.
Grindelwald slowly slid the last of the steak into his mouth, chewing it carefully before replying.
It was part of the agreement after all. What agreement? Did you make an agreement with Dumbledore?
Ivan persisted.
The agreement was simple. I would answer your questions, and he promised me a little comfort.
Grindelwald's face broke into a sardonic smile.
That's all.
Yvonne looked surprised, as the terms of the agreement were not equal. Grindelwald not only had to answer many of his questions, but he also had to give his life for the slightly more comfortable environment. After all, Dumbledore had confirmed that if one was hit by this dark magic and could not be cured in a short period of time, then
I have been imprisoned in this tower for perhaps 50 years. It makes no difference to me whether I die a day earlier or later.
Grindelwald said frankly.
Is that so?
Yvonne looked at Grindelwald critically, her gaze quickly shifting to the papers scattered around the bed. Judging from the headlines, they were the latest editions of the Daily Prophet.
You read the papers all the time. That doesn't seem like the sort of thing a man waiting to die would do.
Yvonne said teasingly, raising her eyebrows.
This tower is such a bore, you have to cultivate habits to pass the time, such as…
Grindelwald's tone remained calm. He pushed his cutlery aside and picked up a Daily Prophet. He looked at the headline, Mysterious Man Strikes Again, Gringotts Suffers Heavy Losses.
It seems that you used the name of the Dark Lord to teach those goblins a lesson. This is something that I've always wanted to do but failed to do.
Ivan replied airily. He had done a lot of things over the years, but they had all been minor British affairs. If one were to count, the total population of wizards and witches in Britain was probably less than that of a Muggle town. More to the point, Ivan felt that he had nothing to be proud of in front of Grindelwald, who had tried to single-handedly start a war between wizards and Muggles, and who had even concocted an astonishing plan to do so, which, even if it failed, was still formidable.
Headmaster Dumbledore told me about you and your many schemes, and I have to say that it was a very practical path, and it inspired me a lot.
Said Ivan.
So we share the same ideals.
Grindelwald's lips curled into a knowing smile, confident that Dumbledore had spoken those words with caution, but the young wizard in front of him seemed to think differently. Ivan, however, shook his head.
No, your ideas are too strong, and while there are lessons to be learned from them, wizards and Muggles need to find ways to coexist.
From Ivan's point of view, even if wizards of a small minority were able to dominate the world for a short period of time, it would be difficult for them to do so for long. Muggles, on the other hand, are unlikely to exterminate wizards, as there is a chance that 2 children born to Muggles will have magical talents.
So you subscribe to Dumbledore's belief that Muggles and wizards should live in harmony.
Grindelwald scoffed.
What's wrong with that?
Yvonne asked.
You're going to put a lion with a sheep.
Grindelwald said disdainfully.
Muggles are not as weak as you think they are.
Ivan said noncommittally.
You mean weapons developed by Muggles specifically for the purpose of massacring their own?
Grindelwald scoffed.
I admit that Muggles are far more efficient at killing than we are, but don't forget that even the most powerful weapon needs to be man-made, and wizard control is enough.
Rather than argue the point with Grindelwald, Ivan said calmly.
You tried to do this decades ago and failed, didn't you?
Grindelwald's expression soured, then softened.
Yes, I did lose, but not at the hands of Muggles, and not those of the Confederation.
Chapter 859, Wizards Are Noble. Ivan interrupted Grindelwald impatiently.
Are you going to say that you only lost to Dumbledore? But I heard from the headmaster that you were doomed before he could do anything. Not necessarily. If he had chosen to side with me, things would have gone exactly as I planned.
Grindelwald said gloomily.
It was only because the rebels knew there were other wizards in the world who could match me that they had the courage to stand against me. It only shows that the majority of wizards still expect to be treated equally by Muggles.
Said Ivan.
Equity!
Grindelwald burst out laughing.
There never was such a thing, it's just a Muggle lie. Even without wizards, Muggles have always tried to use their power and wealth to separate themselves from the rest of the world, enjoying the feeling of having their fellow Muggles under their feet in a vain attempt to remain superior. In the past, they were known as hereditary nobles, but now they are the sons of politicians and plutocrats.
Grindelwald increased the pitch of his voice, and it rang like a bell at the top of the tower.
We are born with the magical power to fool and dominate Muggles at will, as God decreed. We are born rulers, and wizards are born noble.
Grindelwald said, enunciating each word. Yvonne wanted to clap her hands at Grindelwald's words.
Impressive. I'm sure you'd get a lot of believers if you went out now and held a large rally in Britain.
Yvonne now understood why Grindelwald was able to win over large numbers of believers in Europe decades ago. This line alone was enough to make the blood of inexperienced young wizards boil.
They chose to follow me because I spoke their minds and did what they always wanted to do, that's all.
Grindelwald said flatly.
So you believe that wizards are born superior to others and should continue their rule by passing on their magic.
Ivan shook his head.
But even 2 wizards have a chance of producing squibs.
A squib who can't cast spells is equivalent to a muggle. And by the same token, if two muggles give birth to a wizard, then I gladly accept him as one of us.
Grindelwald explained. Grindelwald was far crueler than Ivan had expected, regarding the ability to cast spells as the only standard of hierarchy. He sneered.
You divide wizards and muggles into layers for nothing more than your own ambition to rule the world from above.
Grindelwald asked, not denying it.
I did not create the so-called class. It has always been there, and whether you like to admit it or not, I only keep the better fit where they should be. Perhaps,
Ivan said noncommittally, drawing a line between himself and Grindelwald. He originally thought that the other party's act of fighting the entire wizarding world alone for change was tragic. However, this did not seem to be the case, as Grindelwald was a highly dangerous-minded and ambitious man who deserved to be called the Dark Lord. If Grindelwald had not been living in this tower for decades and had not been under the influence of the dark arts, Ivan would have considered getting rid of him there and then.
that's all for today, and thank you for answering my questions.
Ivan said, waving his wand gently to put away the tray.
As of tonight, I'll have Winky the house elf bring you food, and if you need anything, you can tell her, and Winky will do her best to meet your reasonable needs.
Without waiting for Grindelwald's permission, Ivan headed for the door. As Ivan stepped out of the room, Grindelwald's voice came from behind him.
You will either stand with your own people and fight for their interests, or you will abandon them. There is no third option. I wouldn't be so sure of that.
Ivan replied casually, without looking back, and disappeared in a puff of flame.
Quick!
Ivan asked, frowning as he recovered.
You were inside Voldemort's head again.
Chapter 860, Harry Who Lies Around. Ivan's words were like a bucket of cold water on his head, and Harry's excitement was quelled. He hesitated for a moment, then opened his mouth and said resentfully,
I can't free myself from the dream yet.
Ivan nodded, not wanting to blame Harry, as he had only been practicing with Snape for a day, and occlumency was not easy to master.
So what exactly did you see in the dream?
Yvonne asked curiously. Voldemort may have known that Harry was capable of reaching his mind through some special link to gain information, but the entanglement of their souls was beyond Voldemort's control. So it is possible that the information obtained through this method was false, although there is also a chance that it was true.
It's Snape. Snape's been passing information about us to Voldemort through the ancient clock on his desk in his office.
Harry exclaimed, visibly excited, as if he had caught Voldemort red-handed. Ivan, however, looked at him strangely.
Do you need to tell me that? Harry, Professor Snape is an undercover spy sent by Headmaster Dumbledore to work for the Order of the Phoenix, and sometimes it is only natural to sell information that is not relevant in order to gain the Dark Lord's trust.
Ivan said earnestly, silently defending Snape. Snape's job as a double agent was extremely difficult, as he had to deal with the members of the Order of the Phoenix and Harry's constant questioning, as well as the Dark Lord himself. This was, of course, partly due to Snape's usual dour demeanor, his bad relationship with Sirius, Lupin, and his penchant for hysteric speech, and the fact that he was the only member of the Order of the Phoenix who believed him.
But
Harry said urgently. Snape's snide remarks and forceful seizure of the wand the night before had left Harry with a very bad impression of him, not to mention the fact that Snape had been trying to dig Dumbledore's belongings out of Harry's head, leading Harry to suspect that Snape had thrown his lot in with Voldemort. Ivan looked at Harry and shook his head helplessly. He was willing to trust Snape not only because he had gained Dumbledore's trust, but also because joining Voldemort's cause in its current form would mean certain death, and he was reassured by Snape's special feelings for Harry. However, neither of these points could be said to Harry, as revealing the former might cause an unnecessary misunderstanding, and revealing the latter might cause Snape to fly into a rage and hold a grudge. After all, Dumbledore did not dare to reveal Snape's little secret in the original timeline. Also, Snape's hatred of Harry was genuine, and his willingness to risk his life to keep Harry safe was partly due to his love for Lily and partly due to guilt, a mixture of emotions that Harry, with his lack of experience, would not understand. Given this, Ivan could only patiently reassure Harry that Snape was doing his job as an undercover agent.
If anything happens, feel free to call out to me with your magical mark.
Chapter 861, The Activated Ancient Clock. This can't go on, Harry thought to himself. These days, he barely resisted Snape's prying eyes into his memories. However, after 2 weeks of intense mental work, he had not been able to sleep for many days and was so exhausted that Harry could not guarantee that he would be able to hold on to Snape's legilimency the next time he saw him. Once the brain's defenses were breached, Dumbledore's return of the Cloak of Invisibility would be revealed, and Snape would know what he was thinking.
Ron, can you get me my class schedule?
Ron, who was trying to memorize a Transfiguration book, paused for a moment before replying.
I don't think so. I heard from George and the others that Professor Snape is on leave today.
Harry said confidently, with a hint of excitement in his voice, indicating that Snape was not in his office and would not be returning anytime soon. He could have used the opportunity to sneak into that office and retrieve his wand, or even find evidence that Snape had betrayed them. From his previous dreams, Harry learned that when Snape was busy, or found it difficult to communicate with Lord Voldemort through magical images, he would write the message he wanted to convey to Lord Voldemort on a piece of paper and place it inside the broken bell. There is a specific magic within the ancient bell that allows it to deliver letters accurately to Lord Voldemort.
So you're going to sneak into Snape's office looking for evidence? If you ask me, Snape wouldn't have kept the letters.
Ron sounded dubious after listening to Harry's analysis. Snape wasn't stupid. Any normal person would have destroyed them.
That's not necessarily true. Why else would Snape lock up that cupboard? If he didn't have Voldemort's letters in there, there must be some other evidence.
Harry said confidently, then added.
Besides, there should be something in the ancient clock.
Chapter 862, Your Empty Brain Cannot Hide Anything. As the world spun around him, Harry soon felt himself falling heavily onto the grass, the ancient clock in his hand falling out of his hand and crashing to the ground a short distance away. Harry's high level of myopia caused him to lose sight of his surroundings, and he was only vaguely aware that he was in a wasteland. Harry scrambled to get down on his hands and knees and fumbled around for his glasses. Luckily, the glasses did not fall too far away and were not broken. However, regaining his sight did not give Harry the slightest sense of security. On the contrary, it made him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. Because he knew this place so well, he had even visited it once. The tombstone with the name Tom Riddle was lying not far from him, and the destruction caused by the war a year ago had not completely disappeared. The only difference from the last visit was that the shabby mansion in front of them had been refurbished. Apparently this is Riddle House, home of Lord Voldemort.
Don't waste your breath. This is a safe house, under the protection of the Fidelius charm. Even if Ivan Howells receives your message, he will not be able to get here.
Harry flinched, but before he could turn around, a hand reached out from behind and grabbed his right arm.
I told you not to touch anything in my office.
Snape said coldly as he pulled the invisibility cloak off Harry. He dared not allow Harry to remain in the cloak of invisibility, as he would not have been able to catch him so easily if he had not revealed his location during the teleportation and the search for the glasses.
So you did betray us and join Lord Voldemort.
Harry hissed the moment he saw Snape, his eyes blazing. By now, Harry had figured out that everything Snape had revealed over the past 2 weeks was intentional, and that he was playing along with Lord Voldemort to make Harry believe in what he saw in his dream. However, he was very suspicious of how Snape was so certain that he would enter his office and touch the ancient clock today. Unless...
You figured it out, didn't you?
Snape's lips curled into a sardonic smile, as if he admired Harry's lack of strength.
Obviously, you can't hide anything in that empty brain of yours, and I know every single thing you've ever done. Every single idea you've ever had.
Snape looked at Harry mockingly.
Of course, perhaps I overestimated you, Potter. I'm afraid you can't think that deep.
Harry's face turned red, and he wanted to dig a hole and hide in it when he remembered how he had thought he was so clever as to test Snape's reaction. However, he did not want to see Snape looking so pleased with himself, so he remained silent even though he was in trouble, glaring at Snape with murderous eyes. However, Snape was not as happy as Harry had expected him to be. Instead, he looked nervous, took a deep breath, and dragged Harry towards Riddle House. Harry tried to struggle out of Snape's grip, but the latter's grip was like a vice, and the wand in his right hand made him feel weak. The open door ahead was like the gaping jaws of a demon, and he was stepping through it. The feeling of slowly approaching death was excruciating, and fear washed over him. Harry tried to channel his magic into the magical mark on his right wrist to tell Ivan what had happened to him, but as Snape said, although he received some responses, Ivan was unable to locate him.
Master, I have brought the cloak of invisibility and Harry Potter.
Snape said respectfully as he dragged Harry into the hall. Harry could hear a tremor in Snape's voice, presumably from excitement at being praised by Voldemort.
You did well, Severus. I knew you could do it.
Chapter 863, Harry, don't you dare lie to me again. Voldemort tucked the invisibility cloak into his robes and turned to look at Harry, who was standing dumbly to one side.
We meet again, Potter, the boy who survived. You have escaped me time and time again, but it is a pity you will never be so lucky again.
Being stared at by Lord Voldemort's red, serpentine eyes made Harry dizzy, his legs shook, and the lightning bolt scar on his forehead began to throb with pain, destroying what was left of his sanity. Even so, Harry found the courage to speak.
You will not be pleased for long, Voldemort. Even if you kill me, if you kill Professor Dumbledore, others will stand up to you. Let me guess who gave you such confidence. Ivan Howells, the so-called British savior.
Harry's words caused Voldemort's face to darken and twist. He looked down at the Daily Prophet lying on the table. On the cover was a moving picture of Ivan single-handedly subduing the dragon during the Goblet of Fire last year. Below it, in large letters, was the headline, Most Talented Wizard in British History, Hope for the Future of the Wizarding World Ivan Howells. The more Voldemort read, the more irritated he became, and he used his wand to burn the newspaper to ashes.
I admit that he is very skilled, daring to repeatedly tease the great Dark Lord. However, he will not be arrogant for more than a few days. When I obtain the last Deathly Hallows and obtain the power to transcend life and death, I will definitely return the humiliation he has brought me 1,000 times over.
Disgraceful? Teasing? Harry was baffled, having no idea what Lord Voldemort was talking about, except for the fact that the Dark Lord seemed to hate Ivan so much that he was desperate to find some powerful magical objects to enhance his powers. Voldemort looked at Harry, who was still in a daze, and his lips curled into a sneer as he remembered that Harry probably did not know who Ivan Howells really was.
You might as well tell him how Dumbledore died, Severus.
Snape hesitated for a moment, but then said,
It was Ivan Howells who set Dumbledore up to die, but he framed the Dark Lord for it.
Harry shouted back before Snape could finish.
Everyone in the wizarding world knows you killed Professor Dumbledore.
Voldemort said, his expression dark. Perhaps because he had finally found an audience, and because he wanted to see Harry's faith crumble, Voldemort did not rush into action. Instead, he vented his frustration by revealing all the terrible things Ivan had done to him. Harry, on the other hand, found this absurd. Ivan Harris, her best friend of 5 years, was actually a murderous dark wizard. More than 3 months ago, he was disguised as Lord Voldemort and led a large force into the Ministry of Magic, where he killed the former Minister Fudge on the spot. No Muggle writer could have invented such a story. So there was only one possibility. Voldemort and Snape were trying to deceive him, to drive a wedge between him and them, and after the previous 2 lessons, Harry would not believe such a ridiculous lie. Not to mention that Professor Dumbledore's wand was now in Voldemort's possession, which reinforced Harry's belief. Voldemort went on, but Harry's expression did not change. After reading Harry's thoughts through legilimency, Voldemort felt a sense of powerlessness and was convinced that Trelawney's prophecy was nonsense, for his lifelong enemy could not be such a fool.
Like I said before, I'm afraid Potter's mind can't process anything too complicated.
Snape suggested, looking mockingly at Harry before turning back to Voldemort.
Master, I think you'd better get on with it, just in case.
Snape gently cautioned him and left it at that, but Voldemort understood. The safe house was extremely secure, but no one knew if Ivan Howells would be able to get in. Voldemort could not be bothered to explain himself to Harry, as he was sick and tired of his fateful duel with the boy. In his opinion, Harry Potter was merely a stumbling block in his path, and the man who had brought him so much humiliation, Ivan Harris, was a worthy adversary. Harry stared at Snape with hatred, especially after he suggested that Voldemort should kill him as soon as possible. Harry's hatred of Snape was at its peak, but the fact that he could do nothing and did not even have a wand in his hand killed his last chance of escape.
Farewell, Harry Potter, boy who lived.
Lord Voldemort said casually, lifting his wand gently. Harry's skin crawled at the sight of the glowing green tip of the wand, and fear made him lose control of his body, so that he simply stood there, frozen in place, feeling his heart beating violently in his chest like a drum at a funeral. Harry longed for a miracle more than ever, imagining Ivan or Sirius jumping out of the house and taking him away, as they had done in the dueling at the cemetery.
Avada Kedavra, Avada Fatal Curse.
Chapter 864, Surviving Death. Snape was stunned when he saw Voldemort fall unconscious. He had not expected this. Could it be that Voldemort's destruction of the Horcrux affected him more than ever? Snape's expression was unreadable as he gently hooked his right hand around the wand at his waist, only to pull it back a moment later when Voldemort's eyes flew open.
Master!
Snape immediately pushed those thoughts aside and hurried over to Voldemort, helping him to his feet.
I'm fine.
Voldemort got up from the ground, clutching his forehead, confused as to why he had suffered such a backlash when attacking Harry. Vaguely recalling his strange connection to Harry Potter, Voldemort made a quick guess. However, he did not regret killing Harry Potter, as he had other Horcruxes, and it was only a matter of time before he dealt with his nemesis. Voldemort patted the dust off his robes, then looked at Harry, who was lying motionless on the ground, and asked casually,
Is Harry Potter dead?
Dead and lifeless.
Snape said, his face expressionless but his heart pounding. He knew there was a flaw in his statement. Normally, after the Dark Lord's sudden collapse, he would never have bothered to check on a dead man. Fortunately, Voldemort, who was still in a daze, did not suspect anything. He was certain that his killing curse had hit its target, and no one else would be willing to sacrifice their life for Harry Potter to deflect his spell. When Voldemort did not ask any more questions, Snape quickly changed the subject.
Master, shall we begin the second part of the plan now, or are you prepared to take a break?
Lord Voldemort waved his hand in a placating manner.
I am well and need not rest. And do not forget, our time is limited. When you brought Potter here, you must have used a magical seal to inform Ivan Howells that we had better find the last of the Deathly Hallows as soon as possible. So we go to Numengard now.
Snape asked hesitantly.
No, I'll go alone this time.
Voldemort shook his head. In addition to trying to get the location of the Resurrection Stone out of Grindelwald, he intended to learn more about the Deathly Hallows. Naturally, he did not want Snape to hear any of this confidential information.
Until I return, take care of Harry Potter's body and bring back Fenrir and the others. I'd like to see how many of them make the wrong decision.
Voldemort's red eyes flashed fiercely. Ever since his defeat at Knockoff Alley, he had been keenly aware that his fellow Death Eaters were more or less harboring ill intentions, which was why he and Snape had been conducting recent rallies in secret to prevent anyone from divulging their secret. At the thought of this, Voldemort felt aggrieved. Since when did he, the Dark Lord, have to hide his meetings from his own people? Fortunately, he had already found 2 Deathly Hallows. If he could find the Resurrection Stone, he would be able to completely conquer death. At that point, he would be able to openly swear an oath to the wizarding world that the Dark Lord, who had terrorized Britain, was back. And Harry Potter's body is proof of that. Not daring to disobey Voldemort's orders, Snape dropped the subject of going to Numengard and said respectfully,
Master, I will see to everything before you return.
Voldemort nodded. Snape had always been one to put his mind at ease. After a few words, he used disapparated and disappeared. Snape breathed a sigh of relief as he watched the Dark Lord leave, his back wet with sweat, but he had no time to waste. He ran over to Harry and bent over him, gently testing his breath.
Thank goodness he's still breathing. He didn't lie to me.
Sensing that Harry was still breathing very faintly, Snape let go of the last of his worries and muttered to himself as memories flooded back.
I thought you died somewhere when I didn't see you for half a year.
Snape said sarcastically.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, Severus, but I may be able to hold out for a few more days.
Dumbledore shrugged and poured a cold drink with his good left hand, offering it to Snape. Seeing Dumbledore's calm demeanor, Snape felt both angry and helpless. Dumbledore had disappeared for half a year without a word, not even giving Snape his contact information. He could not even be certain that Dumbledore was alive until he received Fawkes's message. However, Ivan Howells, as well as Lord Voldemort, agreed that he knew everything about Dumbledore's whereabouts and had been questioning him for days, trying to get information about Dumbledore's whereabouts. However, he really did not know anything. After grumbling to himself for a while, Snape suppressed his urge to curse and asked directly.
You've probably heard about the Dark Lord leading the Death Eaters to attack the Ministry of Magic, haven't you? I saw Voldemort yesterday, but he had nothing to do with it. I'm afraid it was Ivan Howells.
Snape was suddenly reminded of what Dumbledore had told him during the summer holidays, and he blurted out.
You saw this coming. You think too highly of me, Severus.
Dumbledore replied slowly, shaking his head.
I did make some preparations, but they were not what you think they were, and in fact, Hales's actions exceeded my expectations.
He easily defeated the Dark Lord and has now taken control of the Ministry. Even the Daily Prophet is speaking for him. I don't think there's any need for your plan to continue.
Snape could see that Voldemort's downfall was only a matter of time, and that he would no longer have to be a troubled double agent.
No, I don't think the situation is all that optimistic. There's something important that I'm afraid Hales can't solve.
Chapter 865, Dumbledore's Plan. Dumbledore's words puzzled Snape, as he thought Ivan, who had taken control of the British wizarding community, could easily deal with the Dark Lord. Even if Voldemort was now in his safe house, Snape did not think he was 100% safe. It would not be difficult to lure Lord Voldemort out of hiding or to ferret out the Secret Keeper, with the stratagems that Ivan Harris demonstrated when he dominated the Ministry. As for the Horcruxes, there was no need to mention them. Over the past 5 years, Ivan Howells had proven repeatedly that no matter how well Voldemort hid them, he would always find a way to find and destroy them. It would not be an exaggeration to call him Voldemort's nemesis. For a moment, Snape wondered if Trelawney's prediction had been wrong, and if it was possible that Ivan Howells was the Dark Lord's mortal enemy, the legendary British savior. Dumbledore naturally saw Snape's confusion and said,
Unfortunately, if I am not mistaken, Voldemort's 7th Horcrux is.
Snape was stunned.
15 years ago, on the night that Voldemort tried to kill Harry, Lily used her life in his place to resist his killing curse and deflect it.
Dumbledore explained. It was then that a fragment of Voldemort's soul was separated and attached to the only living soul in the collapsed house.
Potters!
Snape muttered to himself, then looked at Dumbledore, enunciating each word carefully.
Tell me, is this just a guess? A guess? I would not have mentioned it if I were not so sure.
Dumbledore said, sternly interrupting Snape's last thought.
So,
Snape's body shook uncontrollably, his head spinning. He could not believe that the person he was trying so hard to protect was destined to die.
you thought of that possibility.
Snape demanded, glaring at Dumbledore.
I worked for you as an agent, fabricated lies, and risked my life to deliver information. All to keep Lily Potter's son safe. And now you're telling me he's actually one of the Dark Lord's Horcruxes, a doomed man. No one would want that if they could, Severus.
Dumbledore said quietly.
And don't forget, you are, in a sense, the one responsible.
Snape's heart felt like it had been ripped out of his chest, and his face contorted in pain. After a long moment, he said hoarsely,
Is there no other way, by keeping the child alive?
Dumbledore's words once again caught Snape by surprise, like a weak spark in the darkness. Snape gave Dumbledore a long look, then spoke slowly.
What?
Dumbledore said,
You mean to give this to the Dark Lord sometime?
Snape took out his copy of the Tales of Beedle the Bard, which he kept close to his chest, and looked at Dumbledore in confusion. Was he supposed to tell the Dark Lord a bedtime story? Snape had no doubt that if he handed it over recklessly, Voldemort would happily give him an Avada Kedavra.
I'm guessing you've been reading these stories for some time, haven't you?
Dumbledore asked. Snape nodded. Dumbledore had forced a storybook on him, so he had to find out what it was, and at one point he even wondered if it contained a code or password.
I give them to you because they are more than just stories.
Dumbledore's face was grave as he told Snape everything he knew about the Deathly Hallows.
The Elder Wand.
Snape was shocked to hear about the Deathly Hallows for the first time, especially when he learned of the existence of the Resurrection Stone.
Can the Resurrection Stone really bring back the dead? You plan to revive Lily and then try to make her fall in love with you.
Dumbledore asked, looking at Snape appraisingly.
I'm not as dirty as you think.
Snape shouted angrily, pausing before continuing.
I just want to.
Dumbledore scoffed.
Unfortunately, the Resurrection Stone does not do that. Legends are, after all, legends, and the Deathly Hallows are only powerful magical objects.
Dumbledore showed his blackened right hand.
If the legend were true, and the Deathly Hallows were capable of lifting a person from the brink of death, I would not be reduced to this state.
Disappointment flashed across Snape's face, but he quickly composed himself, remembering that Dumbledore had asked him to give Voldemort the Tales of Beedle the Bard.
Since you have read the story, you should know the properties of the Elder Wand.
Dumbledore went on. Snape hesitated for a moment, staring at the Elder Wand in Dumbledore's hand, then whispered.
The victor of the duel will be the owner of this wand. Yes, but it also has the unknown property that the Elder Wand will not harm its current owner.
Dumbledore explained.
So you're going to make Harry the owner of the Elder Wand, and then use it to attack him.
Snape's brow furrowed.
More than that, I think it must be Lord Voldemort.
Dumbledore added.
Why, according to you, anyone could have done it.
Snape, looking hysterical, was on the verge of retorting against Dumbledore's insane idea.
Because I cannot be certain that Harry's connection to this wand alone will truly withstand the effects of the death curse.
Dumbledore said solemnly.
It will require Lord Voldemort himself.
Harry has Lily's protective charm on him, the second insurance policy.
Chapter 866. Use the disarming charm on me, Severus.
But Lily's protection spell should have worn off by the Dark Lord's return.
Snape said, frowning.
No, I think you and he seriously underestimated the power of that spell, and that Voldemort using Harry's blood to revive him was definitely the wrong decision.
Dumbledore said slowly. Snape nodded. If that were the case, the chances of Lily's child surviving would increase dramatically. However, after careful consideration, Snape found the task extremely difficult. The first is to ensure that Harry becomes master of the Elder Wand and will not be defeated for a long time. The second is to take him to Lord Voldemort, where the Dark Lord himself will cast the killing curse on him, and the third is to get Harry out of there alive.
Then what exactly should I do?
Snape asked, unable to come up with an idea for the moment.
You only need to do 3 things to ensure that this plan will go as smoothly as possible.
Dumbledore said, apparently having no intention of making things difficult for Snape.
First, you must give the Elder Wand to Lord Voldemort and gain his complete trust. It was easy enough to do, as in a week's time I would die in a duel with Ivan Howells, and when he learned of my death, Voldemort would become agitated and desperate for new power.
Snape asked, catching Dumbledore's drift.
Well, it was Voldemort's task to turn me against him, wasn't it? To further gain his trust.
Dumbledore said with a smile.
So you're going to tell the Dark Lord about the Deathly Hallows, along with everything else?
Snape asked suspiciously. Wasn't this plan too risky? The Elder Wand alone was enough to raise Lord Voldemort's power again. What if Lord Voldemort managed to gather all 3 Deathly Hallows?
A mad, deranged Lord Voldemort will do untold damage, so it would be better to lead him to his own death with the legend of the 3 Hallows.
Dumbledore explained. From what he knew of Lord Voldemort, once he was convinced that he would never win against Ivan Hallis, he was likely to do something cruel and insane. However, it would be different if there was new hope. Voldemort would most likely continue to endure and focus solely on the pursuit of the three artifacts, which was exactly what he wanted. Snape thought for a moment, then decided not to argue, and instead went on to ask Dumbledore how he was going to ensure that Harry was not defeated by an accident while he was setting up the trap.
That is the second point I am prepared to make,
Said Dumbledore.
I need a man to promise that Harry will be the true master of the Elder Wand at the most appropriate time. Guaranteed how?
Snape asked.
Of course it is.
Dumbledore's tone suddenly changed, and he said sternly,
Put the disarming charm on me, Severus. What did you say?
Snape's mind failed him, but Dumbledore raised his wand, his hair and beard dancing in the air as a golden-red beam of light gathered at the tip of the wand and flew towards him. Snape felt his skin crawl, and in the face of death, he instinctively retaliated as Dumbledore had instructed.
Excellarmus, excluding your weapon.
The golden-red beam of light passed directly over Snape's head, but his disarming charm was a direct hit, and the wand slipped out of Dumbledore's hand and flew through the air. Snape reached out and took the wand, but as soon as he stood still, Dumbledore spoke again.
Find the right moment and do the same thing to Harry.
Snape looked at the wand in his hand, then back at Dumbledore, and quickly realized that Dumbledore was planning to use him as a transfer point for his legacy, and that if Snape was disarmed by Harry at the right moment, Dumbledore would naturally become the Elder Wand's new master. It was a clever move, as most wizards would not have the ability to defeat him, and Ivan and Voldemort would have to rely on him as a spy to do so.
In addition, I will arrange for you to be in charge of teaching Harry occlumency.
Dumbledore said casually. Snape smiled wryly. It was easy for Dumbledore to say, but it would be hellishly difficult for him to plot against Lord Voldemort without actually knowing that he had tricked Harry and Ivan Harris. However, Snape also knew that he had no choice, and that it was almost the best way to save Lily's child. Why hide it from Ivan? Dumbledore did not say anything, but Snape saw everything. After all, the legend of the Deathly Hallows was so legendary that any wizard would be moved, and Ivan would never have allowed such a treasure to fall into Voldemort's hands. There was also a quicker way to destroy Voldemort's Horcruxes, and that was to kill Harry. A year ago, Snape would have been naive enough to believe that Ivan Harris cared about Harry's well-being. However, the ambition of the Ministry of Magic had been revealed in the battle, and the Minister for Magic was able to kill dozens of Aurors.
What's the last thing you want me to do?
Snape asked Dumbledore nervously. The first two things had bothered him enough, but he felt that the last one might be more difficult. Dumbledore closed his eyes and pondered for a long time. When Snape grew tired of waiting, he finally opened his eyes and said, enunciating each word clearly.
When you have completed the first two tasks, send Voldemort to Numengard and tell him that Grindelwald was the former owner of the Elder Wand and had pursued the three Hallows. He is most likely to know where the Resurrection Stone is. Grindelwald, the Dark Lord you defeated over 50 years ago.
Snape was confused.
You want to lure Voldemort to him, why? All you have to do is tell this to Voldemort.
Dumbledore continued, not bothering to explain.
This is about the Deathly Hallows, and Voldemort will never take you with him when he goes to Numend, and my guess is that he won't be back anytime soon.